on a luxurious carriage on their way leaving Count Hall's villa. Luke was chatting with Ma'am Mary about the distinguished guests, such as the chairman of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council and chief of the National Weather Service, Sir Durs Schall, or the council member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council and president of the Royal Meteorological Society, House of Commons Member of Parliament Mr. Cave, or Mid-Seashire Medical Health's director-in-charge and renowned doctor, Mr. Hawksley. They were all influential figures in the government and the royal family or parliament. And the council's final report would be the most important basis for the planned Anti-Pollution Act and Smoke Emission Act. The Coim Company, which specialized in anthracite and charcoal, was trying to promote and expedite the development, disrupting older but larger competitors from handling the changes. They will certainly not be stingy with their money and will certainly lobby the heavyweight members of Parliament to interfere with our investigation. We must have a clear solution, just like what Mr. Hibbert Hall said. We need to take hold of public opinion and let the newspapers and magazines repeat the horrors of smoke pollution. Luke was a senior manager at Coim, a key assistant to Coim's major shareholder and person in control, Mary, and he himself was quite capable. As they chatted, Luke suddenly noticed that his wife was sitting next to him without saying a word, as if she had lost her soul. "Stellan, what happened?" Luke asked with concern. Stellan jolted back to her senses, forced a smile and said, "Nothing, I'm just a little tired." "That's right. You must be extremely tense seeing so many important figures. Now you can finally relax. Exhaustion is a very normal thing. Actually, it's the same for me." Luke smiled. Stellan didn't respond. Instead, she looked out the window towards the park with a lake. Her ears were still ringing with the casual words of the young noble girl from before. £450. A trained hound is priced between £450 and £700. City of Silver at the bottom of the spire. Derek Berg was locked in a small room, eating food and taking his medicine regularly. As a result, his mental state rapidly improved as his visual and auditory hallucinations were no longer present. "I'll be able to leave in a day or two. It's really hard to stay locked up in such an environment for long periods of time. The former captain of the exploration team in the next cell has been locked up for 42 years, yet he's still very lucid and rational. If it were me, I definitely would have gone crazy. However, the explorations and strange monsters that he spoke of are rather attractive and even terrifying." Derek sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the candle that had burned to the end. Before the keepers delivered his next round of food and medicine, he would be placed in true darkness. At that moment he saw a grey fog spread out as the deep voice of the fool sounded. "Prepare for the gathering." Such a change was fleeting. Derek focused his attention and subconsciously counted his heartbeats. However, he soon realized that this wasn't necessary because his current state was one of solitude, and he didn't need to avoid others. Derek, who was no longer counting his heartbeats, quickly thought of a question. Would Mr. Fool's subsequent actions of pulling me above the grey fog be discovered and detected when I'm within the confines of the seal of the mystical object at the bottom of the spire? These were two mystical items that had prevented the complete destruction of the City of Silver in the face of several calamities. In his nervousness and uneasiness, Derek, who had been unable to come to a decision, saw endless dark red lights gushing out of the void and engulf him. The small, enclosed room turned completely silent. Even the sound of his breathing had become extremely weak. Suddenly, the metal wall between Derek and the former exploration team's captain produced a tapping sound. This was the signal the two of them used if they wished to talk to each other. The other person bent his finger and knocked again. After that, what should have been a third tap that followed in succession didn't happen. After a long while, the tapping sound hesitantly rang out again. Following that, both rooms fell into silence and not a single sound could be heard. After finishing her luncheon, Audrey practiced on the piano before returning to her bedroom while keeping track of the time. As she passed her father's study, she saw that the door was ajar and a thick stack of papers lay on the table. Those weren't there before. Curious, Audrey slowed down and winked at Susie. As a spectator, Susie often needed only a small hint to understand what her mistress wanted her to do. Of course, she would also occasionally pretend that she didn't understand, only wishing to lie still. Susie, who had received the signal, trotted silently into the study, then stretched out her front paws, placed them on the edge of the table and stood upright. She quickly glanced at the front page of the stack of documents, returned to Audrey's side and said in a low voice, "Survey of living conditions at all levels in East Borough, the dock area and the factory district." Audrey, what do those words mean? Survey of living conditions at all levels in East Borough, the dock area and the factory district? Why did Dad suddenly commission this survey? I don't remember ever mentioning anything about this to him. Audrey was confused and didn't bother to answer Susie's question. She looked around and seeing that the servants were at their stations and not paying particular attention to her, she raised her head slightly and calmly turned to enter Count Hall's study. At the desk, Audrey looked down at the report and saw that the title was exactly as Susie had described it. It's document typed by a typewriter. The investigator is a reporter named Mike Joseph. There's the goddess's sacred emblem at the bottom. Was this commissioned by the Church of the Goddess? But why is Father given a copy? Oh, Father is a believer of the goddess, and the church wants him to provide some support on this matter? That's a good thing. Audrey made a preliminary judgment. She had originally thought of hiring others to do a similar investigation, but she felt that this was not in accordance with her intention of guiding others behind the scenes. It was very easy to be noticed and no longer be ignored by the other nobles. Therefore she had been hesitant. Audrey reached for the file and flipped through it. She found that Mike Joseph wasn't the only one reporting on East Borough, the dock area and the factory district. There were also quite a few people who had made their own field investigations from different angles. Some of them even mentioned the proliferation of cults, and how some Beyonders were colluding with the gangs. Phew. Audrey looked at the clock in the study and saw that it was almost 3. She quickly gave up on reading the report carefully and returned the document to its original state. Before she left, she picked up a book and used it as a disguise for her purpose of entry. At 3 o'clock sharp, while the chiming of the hanging clock was still reverberating through the air, Audrey had already appeared inside the majestic palace via the dark red illusory light and found herself beside the ancient long table. She smiled, stood up and bowed in the direction of the seat of honor. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Having received a light nod in response, she then respectively greeted the hanged man, the world and company. She keenly noticed that the son seemed to be a little uneasy. "What are you worried about?" Audrey asked. This spared Klein's need to speak, having also noticed that little son didn't seem right. Entering this mysterious space ahead of time, he tidied the items on the table, tossing them into a corner along with Azek's copper whistle, the biological poison bottle, Numinous Episcopat's copper whistle and other things. He had then covered them with a thick fog. Presently there was only the Dark Emperor card on the table before him. This was an item that matched the identity of the fool. Derek didn't hide anything and immediately recounted his successful malingering, and how he was sent to the bottom of the spire to be isolated for treatment. Finally he asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, will that mystical item detect my participation in the Tarot Club?" "How would I know? I don't even know what it is. However, there are currently no strange or powerful forces attempting to invade. Even the eternal blazing sun and the true creator couldn't find this place." Klein tapped his finger on the edge of the long bronze table and replied in a relaxed manner, "Generally speaking, it wouldn't make any discoveries. But some mystical items possess special effects." Seeing that Mr. Fool had given an affirmative answer, Derek was immediately relieved. He tersely gave acknowledgement and said, "I'm not sure of its special effects either. It's one of the City of Silver's top secrets." At this point he suddenly thought of what the former captain of the exploration team had told him. He blurted out a question, "Have any of you heard of a person named Amon?" Amon. After a moment's thought, Klein remembered the source of the familiarity. But he didn't answer in a hurry. Instead he looked at the hanged man, knowing full well that this middle-ranking member of the Church of the Lord of Storms also knew Amon, and perhaps he knew even more than he did. Similarly, Audrey also looked at the hanged man. She had also heard the name from him the last time. Furs listened with a blank face, feeling that the things discussed here were always outside the scope of her knowledge. Alger frowned and asked in confusion, "You ran into a man who called himself Amon while you were exploring the surrounding areas of the City of Silver? Or perhaps you discovered related records?" Derek nodded seriously and said, "Yes, 42 years ago an exploratory team encountered a man claiming to be Amon in the depths of the darkness. After they returned to the City of Silver they lost control one after another. Only one of them was left and he was imprisoned at the bottom of the spire in the cell next to me. Maybe he went mad too and that was just a figment of his imagination. Furs, with a wealth of novel creation experience, postulated a guess. Alger glanced at Mr. Fool, who sat at the end of the table. Seeing him appear staid and without expressing anything, he boldly said, "Imagination is a possibility, but one shouldn't imagine the name Ammon for no reason." He turned his head to the sun and said, "In the fourth epoch, about 1,500 years ago in the kingdom we live in, there was a family with strange powers. They belonged to the Tudor dynasty and their surname was Ammon. Even in an era with numerous high-sequence beyonders, the surname of the clan was taboo." Justice Audrey asked instead of the sun, "Why?" The hanged man Alger didn't answer her directly as he continued on. "Abraham, Antigonus, Ammon, Jacob and Tamara are the 5 great families that supported the establishment of the Tudor dynasty, and they were second only to the Blood Emperor. Among them, the Ammon family is the most mysterious one. They have the least history left behind, and they seem to have been distorted and covered up by some kind of power. There was a piece of information that came from the king of the 5 seas, Nast. The Ammons are a family of blasphemers, and they wield the secrets to usurp the powers of deities. Also, the Ammon family call themselves the descendants of the ancient sun god." Derek Berg was left confused. In his knowledge of myths, there was no such thing as an ancient sun god. Among the 8 ancient deities, giant king Ormur, dragon of imagination Ankwelt, mutated king Kvastor, elf king Saniathrim, king of demonic wolves Fleegria, vampire ancestor Lilith, phoenix ancestor Gregrace, and devil monarch Farbati, none of them wielded the power of the sun. Derek seriously considered this problem. If I really need to make a connection, the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, had shown powers in the sun domain. Could the Ammon family be his descendant? Noticing that Sun wasn't saying anything, Alger stroked the stubble on his chin and said, "The Ammon family is an ancient family clan from 1 to 2,000 years ago. It is almost history itself. I'm very curious. Why did the gentleman that you met appear around the City of Silver? What is his goal?" "That's right, how could the Ammon family, which exists in the world of Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice and Company, appear around our City of Silver? Why did he fail to fulfill his promise after accepting the request of being a guest? He mysteriously left and caused the entire team to lose control." "Yes, other than the captain. What did he want to do? What was he looking for? If he is a descendant of the Lord, perhaps his purpose is the same as mine. To find out the cause of the cataclysm from ancient times and to find out the truth of the curse." Derek let his imagination run wild for a moment. After a while, he shook his head and said, "Mr. Hanged Man, I'm unable to answer your question. I'm also trying to figure out this matter." Alger replied, looking somewhat disappointed, "Try to communicate with the former captain in your neighboring cell more. See if you can dig up more information from him." Upon saying this, he thought for a moment and warned, "However, you must be careful and prudent. I think that person is very dangerous." "Very dangerous? You think so too?" Derek asked, feeling somewhat surprised. The elders of the 6-member council also thought the same. The hanged man looked up at the lofty dome and took a deep breath. Those who don't think so are the ones without sound minds. Seeing that the sun was still confused, he shook his head and said, "He's the only surviving member of the exploration team. Just this matter alone is enough to prove that there's something tremendously wrong with him. He's been in the dungeon facing rampagers for 42 years. Yet he remains very lucid and rational. This shows how weird he is. Compounded with the matter regarding the mysterious Ammon, the danger is obvious." These were the little bits and pieces that Derek had thought about in the past, but he hadn't yet connected together. When he heard that, he suddenly became enlightened and immediately said sincerely, "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man." Audrey, who was listening attentively and observing, resisted the urge to cover her face with her hand. She felt that the sun was even more naive than she was. Seeing that everyone's curiosity had been satisfied, that even the gloomy Mr. World had slightly adjusted his posture, and that the sun didn't seem to have any other requests, she turned her head to the end of the long bronze table and said with a smile, "Mr. Fool, I request a private exchange." Klein was amused as he nodded and said, "Sure." He immediately shielded the senses of the Hanged Man and Company, rather than isolating himself and Miss Justice. It was mainly because he was afraid that the others might end up communicating out of boredom, thereby exposing the fact that the world was only a repeater. After receiving the signal, Audrey smiled and said, "Mr. Fool, I have another 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." After the card of blasphemy was stolen by the fool's adorer, she didn't avoid visiting the Royal Museum out of guilt. Instead, she acted as if nothing had happened. She openly requested this to her father, and in the week after the exhibition ended, she got another chance to flip through the notebook. Audrey thought that appearing unfazed was the best way to avoid suspicion. If she maintained the constant act of feeling guilty and did not do what was logical, even if the Church of the God of Steam didn't suspect her previously, they would subsequently feel that there was a problem. According to her own experience, she believed that the very first few pages of a diary would reveal a lot of information, so she mainly memorized the first 3 pages. Without waiting for the fool to speak, she quickly added, "I understand that this isn't a matter that requires a private exchange, but I wish to keep this from Miss Magician for a week or 2. That way, even if she knows that you need Roselle's diary in the future, she wouldn't suspect that I'm Justice." She had seen Furs and Zio once midweek, and by leading the conversation she had naturally mentioned how her beloved dog, Susie, had chewed the Roselle notebook, causing it to be irrecoverable. Typically speaking, she no longer needed to hide the fact that Mr. Fool needed Roselle's diary, but using her telepathist abilities she simulated what Furs would think, believing that she would have such a thought. "What? That's a diary? That's a diary Roselle recorded his secrets in? Even Mr. Fool places so much importance on it. I recall that Miss Audrey has some." Wait a moment. She happened to have those diary pages chewed up by her dog a few days ago. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? To prevent Furs from having such thoughts, Audrey hoped to keep it a secret for at least another week. After becoming a telepathist, not only was she able to see the aura and the emotional color of the target, but she was also able to read the superficial thoughts of others and could also simulate their thoughts. Thus, she understood one thing, that in the process of guiding others, she had to try her best not to be abrupt or act against logic and reason. Only when all the details were subtle enough and reasonable enough to make the target not realize that she was being guided, would she be considered a qualified telepathist. Subtle and reasonable are the 2 most important keywords. Audrey concluded in her mind. The reason why she went to read Roselle's notebook, again, was precisely to avoid being unreasonable. She truly is worthy of being a telepathist. She's recognized long ago that Miss Magician is one of the 2 people that she had recommended. Klein smiled in a non-committal manner. "What do you want to exchange those 3 pages for?" This question was asked with confidence because, after obtaining the Book of Secrets, his greatest weakness in the field of mysticism had already been bridged. As for the secrets of the other deities as well as his knowledge of sequences, he knew a lot about them. Just any one of them was enough to deal with Miss Justice. "We will still be friends if you don't talk about the psychiatrist formula," Klein lampooned in his heart. Audrey had already long thought of her question. She remained reserved for a second before saying, "Mr. Fool, I wish to ask one question. Why is it said that the cards of blasphemy hide the profound secrets of the deities?" "Great question." Klein smiled secretly. Giving her a look for her to figure it out herself, he said deeply and calmly, "Sequence 0, Dark Emperor." "Sequence 0? There's still a Sequence 0? There's a Sequence 0 above Sequence 1? Is that a sequence representing a god? The Dark Emperor is a god?" A series of questions suddenly surfaced in Audrey's mind. This caused her to be pleasantly surprised, satisfied, and shocked. Restraining her agitation and unconcealable excitement, she took a deep breath and conjured the 3 pages of Roselle's diary. Klein took a quick glance and confirmed that this was not one of the ones he had seen before. February 23, 1143. "I've transmigrated to this world for more than a week. I have to write something down and describe the things I have encountered or I feel like I'll go crazy. If I write it in simplified Chinese, I'm sure that no one will be able to decipher it. This world uses alphabetical words. I am now Roselle Gustave, but I'll never forget my real name. Huang Tao. I don't know how I transmigrated either. I carefully recalled and thought about it for a long time, and then I remembered that a few days before my transmigration, I bought a very mysterious silver plate with some strange symbols and patterns engraved on it. It was extremely interesting. However, it did not reappear after my transmigration here. It's not my cheat item. This is a world similar to ancient Europe. It's after the Renaissance and cannons and guns have appeared, but they're rather crude and primitive. As for me, Huang Tao Roselle Gustave, as a fan of online literature, I loved reading transmigration with technology genre novels. I know quite a lot of useful things and specifically read up on the corresponding knowledge. This is the stage where I can display my abilities. But I realize that my King memory isn't good. I've almost forgotten everything. The heavens allowed me to transmigrate to another world, but I wasn't given an outstanding memory or a system. Nor was I given a two-way door. How can I survive like this? Alright, I'll start with some details. When I have the money, I'll hire a bunch of craftsmen, inventors, and scientists. I'm only responsible for giving them ideas. It's been a long time since I felt so full of anticipation for the future. But I still miss mom and dad a little. Besides, the entertainment in this world is too monotonous. The one or two maids don't look that good and their entire bodies exude rustic vibes. It makes me wish that Hongxiu.com one goes completely bankrupt. I haven't finished reading Lin Gao's 500 Good-for-Nothings too, and there are so many beauties that are awaiting me on TikTok. The games Kings of Glory and PUBG are still waiting for me. Thinking about them makes me feel a little depressed. As Klein read, he nearly frowned. Initially, he had determined from the appearance of Pirate King and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse that Roselle had crossed over 3 to 5 years earlier than him. But now he realized that the gap between their transmigrations couldn't be more than a year. But why was there a difference of nearly 200 years on this side? Klein thought seriously for a while and came up with all sorts of theories, but because he lacked the necessary information, he could only temporarily ascribe the cause of the matter to the difference in the flow of time between the Earth and this world. Roselle and I have transmigrated less than a year apart, but in this world we are separated by nearly 200 years. That is to say, even if I were to spend 200 years to find a way to return, it's likely that I won't lose the opportunity to meet my parents. At most, I'd have been missing for a year. Klein made a contrasting inference, improving his mood significantly. He instantly felt filled with motivation. Of course, he himself knew very well that this reasoning was not rigorous, because this was determined by one precondition, and it was currently impossible to confirm it. What if Roselle transmigrated after me? That might involve so-called spatial-temporal turbulence. When the time comes, there is no guarantee that I'll return to the proper time node. Klein poured cold water on his burgeoning mood. Roselle's first diary entry was the product of having held back for a long time. Therefore, it took up more than 2 pages. Klein flipped to the end and read the remaining 2 lines. February 25th. What a boring world. There are no newspapers and so few novels. I think I need to help this culturally impoverished society, but the premise of this is that I have to get some money and recall how paper is made and how the print press is done. As a transmigrator, I can only live on the pocket money that my new dad and mom gave me. I can only occasionally see 1 or 2 shiny Firmo gold. What a tragic story. However, hunting is quite interesting. February 28th. This world might be a little different from what I know it to be. I got lost while hunting in the woods today. As a result, I saw an unimaginably intense battle. In the battle, the man who was surrounded had additional eyes growing on his face. A total of 4 eyes. They even shot dark green light. This is King illogical. Is this a humanoid monster? This is actually a fantasy world, right? That monster's opponent was even more powerful. He summoned a pillar of light that burned with golden flames. Yes, I think it was summoned. Fortunately, they didn't discover me. After getting rid of that monster, that person left with the corpse. I, Huang Tao, am indeed the protagonist. I discovered the truth of this world a few days after I transmigrated. Perhaps they can recognize the mysterious symbols and patterns on the silver token. Of course I won't ask. I want to become like them and crack it myself. There's another key reason as to why I said this. I can't even King remember what the pattern looks like. I can only vaguely remember it. Indeed the protagonist? Emperor, did you pour all of your 8th grader syndrome soul into your diary? Klein couldn't help but lampoon. He was very interested in the silver plate, which might have been the cause for Roselle's transmigration, and he was eager to find out what the symbols and patterns on it looked like. If he could really decipher it by relying on the mysticism knowledge of this world, then transmigration might not have just been a coincidence. Klein put down the diary pages, wrapped his fingers on the table, and lifted the screen that isolated the hanged man and the magician. Go ahead and trade freely. Klein leaned back in his chair and smiled. Furs took a deep breath and said, I would like to purchase the stomach pouch of a spirit eater and 20 milliliters of blood from a deep-sea marlin. It will be paid for in gold pounds. I still have 430 pounds. I can afford one. She silently encouraged herself. As for where the rest of the money would come from, she had no idea. This is one of the main reasons that prevent many Beyonders from advancing. People cannot really attempt to spend beyond their means. If it wasn't for me having to become a trick master to completely be rid of the influence of the full moon's ravings, I wouldn't even consider advancement once I gained rich Beyonder means. I wouldn't even make contact with this circle. I'll write books, save up money, drink tea and stroll the streets with Sayo. Once she's finished with that task, we can travel to different parts of the northern and southern continent. We don't have to be afraid of danger or accidents and we can enjoy life. Furz's thoughts suddenly began to wander. Just when she thought that no one would respond, Alger said in a low voice, I saw the deep-sea marlin's blood at the recent gathering of the great pirates, but unfortunately you've already missed it. You should have said so earlier. Oh, I'm mistaken. You hadn't joined the tarot club back then. Then what's the point of saying this? Showing off your experience? Furs curled her lips secretly but said in all seriousness, Mr. Hanged Man, please keep an eye out for me. I can accept a price between 300 and 400 pounds. Alger sneered. The sea is even vaster than the land. Pirates might not even meet each other in half a year. Even on the islands that they dispose of their loot, Beyonder ingredients are seldom gathered. Only big cities like Backlund, Trier, St. Millum, and Fainapotter can have many ingredients gathered together. From your accent, you should be a Backlund citizen, or someone who has been living in Backlund for many years. You mean that I still need to rely on myself? Furs almost looked up at the high dome. At this point, Derek said, I know roughly where a few spirit eaters are active. But I don't need the gold pounds you people talk about. Furs said with a fake smile, what do you want? The formula for the Solar High Priest potion. Audrey quickly answered inwardly. Derek thought seriously and said, the Solar High Priest potion formula. That's a sequence 7 formula, right? I've heard of it, but the formula for this sequence is at least 750 pounds, and if you're in a hurry to get it, it can be sold for more than 1,000 pounds. Furthermore, the stomach bag of a spirit eater and blood of a deep-sea marlin do not exceed 400 pounds each. They're only worth 300 pounds most of the time. Do you understand me? Furs tried to make it clear to the son that this was not an equivalent transaction. Without hesitation, Derek replied, I can give you 2 or 3 of the spirit eater's stomach bags. As for the additional need for a deep-sea marlin, he didn't even consider it. He had never even seen the sea before. What can I do with the additional spirit eater's stomach bags? Roast them or fry them? To be honest, I have no idea when I'll be able to sell it. Most importantly, I'm unable to afford the formula for Solar High Priest. Furs forced a smile and said, I'll try searching. She thought of the masked eternal blazing sun believer at Mr. A's gathering who was good at purification. She thought of the Band of Light Ring and she believed that she could get a clue to the potion formula of Solar High Priest. But I don't have enough money. Furs thought for a moment, touched her face, looked around and then asked with great sincerity, Everyone, do you have any good ways of earning money? As soon as she finished her sentence, she realized that everyone had fallen into silence. Silence could be described by the soundless palace and the quiet gray fog. From the looks of it, everyone faces this conundrum. As for Mr. Fool, he doesn't need money. Furs wisely shut her mouth. Isn't the best way to make money be from owning farms, mines, plantations, factories, stocks, etc.? Oh, you can also go through the kingdom's bounty notices and complete them in accordance with the price and the period of time at a bearable level. Audrey knew that she didn't have any real experience in making money, so she could only respond with a few words in her heart as if she was joking. Might I interest you in bicycle projects? Klein resisted the urge to manipulate the words of the world, which would expose his true identity. After waiting for a few seconds, he maintained an unfathomable posture, making the world gloomily and hoarsely say, Help me keep a lookout for the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland and blood, as well as a human-skinned shadow's characteristic and a deep-sea naga's hair. Although Klein only had 589 gold pounds left, he now had the Beyonder characteristic of a werewolf and the biological poison bottle. Furthermore, he was considering to find an opportunity to turn the former into a mystical item and then sell one of them. In that case, that's more than enough to match the cost of Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredient. Therefore, he planned to have the members of the Tarot Club help him pay attention in advance so that he wouldn't miss them. All right. The son, Derek, answered first, but he made no promises. Compared to a spirit eater, human-skinned shadows and thousand-faced hunters aren't monsters that are easy to encounter. Thousand-faced hunter? I think I've seen a fossil of it, Justice thought as she replied. Yes, I'll confirm that after I return. That fossil was in Duke Negan's treasury. If it's already a fossil, its Beyonder characteristic has probably long been taken away. Klein manipulated the world and nodded noncommittally. After a moment of silence, Alger said, "Help me keep an eye out on a person who was involved in the disappearance of the colonial slaves that was mentioned before. He calls himself Balin, a man with reddish-brown skin and has the clear characteristics of a southerner, but someone has overheard him speak in a Backland accent. The third tooth on his left is missing, but it could very well have been replaced. In addition, there's nothing special about him and his height is also quite average. If you can find traces of him, there will be no problem with the reward at all, with it being at least 100 pounds or something of equal value. Even divination can't be completed with such a description, let alone carrying out a search for the person in the real world." Klein looked around and said, "Continue with your free exchange." At the end of the tarot gathering, Derek returned to the real world and found himself in the dark, cramped room. He sat on the ground cautiously for a few seconds, but he didn't discover any unusual changes. He was finally able to let out a sigh of relief. Remembering that Mr. Hanged Man had advised him to talk more with the former exploratory team's captain, Derek walked over to the corresponding metal wall, bent his fingers and tapped on it. He completed his signal, but there was no response even after a long time. Did he fall asleep? Or was he taken to the six-member council? Derek wondered while looking at the dull metal wall. At this moment, an elderly and fleeting voice came from the bed behind him. "Are you looking for me? Are you looking for me?" The moment the voice entered his ears, Derek froze. His skin tensed up and his hair stood on end. Why is he behind me? Why is he in my room? What happened to the seal? What about the effects of the mystical items? His forehead dripped with cold sweat and he subconsciously wanted to turn around to take a look. But his instinct stopped him from doing so. This instinct originated from the teachings of the City of Silver's general knowledge of monsters lessons and the strange scene he had experienced after joining the patrolling teams. When someone is speaking behind you, don't turn around in a hurry. Derek raised his hands and clenched them into fists in front of his chest. Then slowly he turned around bit by bit. The room was shrouded in darkness, making it impossible to see anything. However, there was a tint of golden light that was expanding in his two eyes, transforming into what seemed like two miniature suns. With his light suppliant powers, he saw a dark figure sitting quietly on the edge of his bed. The dark figure rapidly turned clear, revealing a head that had been split in half. In the middle of his head, two gray brains wriggled like they were alive, trying to get close to each other but being unable to do so. The thick, viscous liquid on the severed surface of his brain had turned into thin threads, but they were shrinking like maggots. Each eye that was on the two separate sides were distanced apart, and the nose bridge was separated from the middle. The color of the blood was bright and evident. The left side of his mouth was open, but the right side of his mouth was tightly shut. This terrifying monster was naked and there were numerous dark red wounds on its body. The countless wounds had torn open savagely, revealing rows and rows of white teeth. They said the same sentence in quick succession, "Are you looking for me?" It paused for a moment, the corners of its mouth and the edges of its wounds were curling up. "Look, am I not normal?" Derek's pupils contracted, and without thinking he placed his folded hands on his chest and raised them to his chin as if in prayer. The small room suddenly became bright, and a pure beam of light, swirling with fire, fell from the roof and onto the monster's body. The beam was not as grand as the one used by Derek outside the spire. This was because of the seal here and the mystical item which left him isolated from the spire's exterior. But at that moment, Derek was stunned to see the holy light beam that he had prayed for was suddenly thickening. It was so bright that he couldn't help but close his eyes. A few moments later, something purer and thicker separated from the magnificent pillar of light. It was like a man made of light with no facial features and no clothes. The man of light suddenly coruscated and pounced on the monster. All the mouths on the monster suddenly opened, as if it was letting out a blood-curdling screech. Yet Derek heard nothing. The monster began to tremble violently and quickly disintegrated under the burning and illumination of the man of light, disappearing as if it were melting. Just as it was about to become transparent, a phantom wearing a black classical long robe and a pointed hat suddenly appeared. The shadow had black hair, black eyes, a wide forehead and a thin face. It wore a monocle carved from crystal. As soon as he appeared, the man of light exploded, and Derek's vision was filled with whiteness. When his eyesight was restored, he found himself outside the room in the corridor with the metal lamps set in it, in the dim light of the setting sun. He tilted his head blankly and looked into the room. He saw a tall, muscular figure in dark trousers and a brown coat. In front of this figure was the bed which Derek had been sleeping in. Dawn-like rays of light condensed onto a white leg bone, turning it into a pure white, sharp sword. Next to the straight sword lay a translucent worm. It was only the length of a thumb, and its slimness was almost that of a child's finger. One ring after another of completely transparent colors divided it into many sections. It was a fleeting scene, and without specially counting the number of rings, he had a vague feeling that there were about 10 of them. The tall figure which had its back facing him reached out his hand to pick up the strange translucent worm. As he turned around, he sighed. It was close. At that moment, Derek finally saw the face of the tall figure. His hair was grizzled, unkempt and rather disheveled. He had deep wrinkles around his cheeks, but there were no wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. Some old scars that were either deep or twisted remained on his cheeks. He was dressed in a flaxen-colored shirt with a checkered leather belt around his waist, and his pale blue eyes were deep and weathered, like a book full of stories. For a moment, Derek was stunned, and then, as though he had been in danger all his life, he opened his mouth in pleasant surprise. "Your Excellency." In front of him was Chief of the City of Silver's 6-member council, a powerful demon hunter who was over 100 years old, Colin Iliad. Colin nodded slightly and said, "We always knew that he had a problem, but in order to find out what kind of ulterior motives the man named Amon had, we intentionally didn't eliminate him directly, and we instead locked him at the bottom of the spire, sealed under the influence of mystical items, and we often let Beyonders, who only have symptoms of losing control, live next to him and talk to him. We wanted to see if we could induce some abnormal changes in him in order to learn the information we wanted to know. Unfortunately, he had been very normal until today, way too normal. Why do you think he suddenly mutated and attempted to break through the seal? Do you have any idea what makes you different from the others? So it was purposely arranged for me to live next to the former exploration team captain." After a few seconds of silence, Derek said, "Maybe it's because my Beyonder pathway is different from the others. Sequence 9 Bard, Sequence 8 Light Suppliant. In other words, the Sun pathway. If Mr. Hangman is right, that the Amon family is the descendant of an ancient sun god, then it's normal for me to cause a mutation to happen to him." Derek felt he knew the truth to a certain extent. Colin listened without a change in expression. He sized up Derek for a few seconds before saying, "We were monitoring him. The members of the 6-member council took turns, but we didn't expect him to suddenly mutate. There were 0 warning signs and his actions were very decisive and determined." "What were you doing in the room just now?" Derek, who was considering the relationship between the sun pathway and the ancient sun god, didn't instantly realize what the chief was asking about. When he realized it, his mind was still blank as he seriously recalled what he had done. "I didn't do anything. I just knocked on the wall and tried to talk to him. Before this, I was participating in the tarot gathering." "The tarot gathering?" Derek was suddenly stunned. He felt that things might not be as simple as he had imagined. He knew that he couldn't inform the chief of his thoughts, but he didn't know what kind of expression to make, so he could only maintain his lonely, reserved silence. He said thoughtfully, "I knocked on that wall 3 times. Before that, the candle in my room had extinguished and there was complete darkness. I had tried to practice some of my Beyonder powers." Colin looked into Derek's eyes quietly and said after nearly 20 seconds, "Unfortunately, what Amon left in his soul was not his original body. Moreover, this matter happened too suddenly, so we were unable to obtain the desired result. Before his mutation, did you sense anything amiss?" "No." Derek shook his head with conviction. Colin's eyes suddenly flashed with two complex, dark green symbols, and he reflected Derek's body in them. After nearly 10 seconds of silence, the City of Silver's chief closed his eyes and said, "Your condition has stabilized. You don't need any more treatment, so you can go back now." Derek was startled. "All right." He watched demon hunter Colin Iliad turn back into the room, pick up the sharp white sword and turned it over and over in his hands. He quietly took a deep breath and walked along the corridor towards the exit. On the way he met the keepers who had rushed over one after the other. He slowly walked back home and closed the door. He carefully observed his surroundings for a while, then he sat down on the edge of the bed and recited in a low voice, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I've just experienced something terrifying." Derek recounted what had happened and mentioned his two guesses. After doing all of that he felt much more at ease. And with his tense state of mind relaxing he felt immense exhaustion wash through him. He lied down and quickly fell asleep. In the silent and dark room, flashes of lightning would occasionally illuminate everything. Otherwise it would seem like the dark night. The sleeping Derek suddenly flicked his right index finger and leisurely tapped it on the bed. Once, twice, thrice. After the tarot gathering, Klein didn't divine the werewolf's beyonder characteristic or the biological poison bottle due to his spirituality expenditure. Instead he went straight back to the real world for a nap. After 20 minutes he woke up and drew the curtain, allowing the light that penetrated through the mist to bring a certain degree of light into the room. Sitting on the chair in front of the desk, Klein calmed down and began considering what he needed to do in the short term. The main goal is to continue concluding the rules of a magician and make adjustments according to the subtle feedback from my spirituality. Although rules like never performing unprepared, the need to have a stage and a performance, and completing a performance using means of diversion, do not seem problematic at the moment. If I were to continue acting this way and performing slight adjustments, I'll eventually digest the potion and reach the advancement state. But this sort of acting isn't sufficient. I'm still lacking some of the important rules. Currently what I'm doing will make the digestion slow and not thorough. Perhaps it will take a year or perhaps even 2 or 3 years before my sequence advancement is possible. And Nsangwil won't remain there waiting for me. Only through becoming a high sequence beyonder as soon as possible will I be qualified to take revenge. Therefore figuring out the other magician rules is of utmost importance. I'll first determine them through experimentation whether the applause from an audience will stir my spirituality and result in better digestion of the potion. Just as Klein was deep in thought he heard a series of illusory, stacked pleas. A male voice. "Is it Mr. Hanged Man or Little Son?" Klein looked out the window at the gloomy sky, got up, went into the bathroom next door. He locked the door, took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. Within that mysterious space, a towering ancient palace quietly stood. The illusory male voice echoed in a stacked, continuous manner. Klein glanced at it and confirmed that the prayer was from Little Son. He sat in the fool's seat and stretched out his right hand, emanating his spirituality to touch the corresponding crimson star. Suddenly, the voice became clear and layered, and Klein quickly figured out what the son was talking about. The former captain of the exploration team who had seen Amon suddenly lost control and strangely penetrated through the seal, arriving at his room. Fortunately, the City of Silver took this matter seriously and had been constantly prepared for it. Otherwise, it would have led to a tragedy. The son believes that it's impossible that there was no reason for the man's loss of control. He came up with 2 possibilities. One was that his own beyonder pathway met the requirements of being the ancient sun god's descendant, and the other possibility was that the man might have sensed the tarot gathering and Mr. Fool's secret pull. If it were the former, he wouldn't have waited until today and waited until the end of the tarot gathering before losing control. The latter reason has a greater probability. This is the first time I've encountered someone who can sense the matters regarding the gray fog. That Amon is very scary. It's no wonder their family was known as the blasphemers during the 4th epoch. Even their last names are taboo. Klein subconsciously looked at the crimson star and the corresponding supplicant. He carefully observed the blurry image of Little Son to see if there was anything abnormal with him. Klein believed that Amon wouldn't be so easily eliminated. Even if it was as the chief of the City of Silver had said, that his body wasn't his main body, it didn't make it any easier to eliminate him. The only possibility is that the powerhouses in the City of Silver have been using mystical items to monitor him, but is that even possible? When he decided to let the former leader of the exploration team lose control and silently penetrate through the seal, he definitely had a plan in place. In the midst of his thoughts, Klein's eyes suddenly froze as he looked at the prayer scene. Entwined on the indistinct body of the sun was a translucent and illusory figure. He had hands and feet, but he was like a python twisting around the sun while his head rested behind the sun's head. In the blurred image he was wearing a black classical robe, a pointed hat and a crystal monocle. The sun didn't notice any of this. Klein almost drew a cold gasp, shocked at the strange means that were available to that entity. He vaguely understood the other party's intention. By residing in the spirit body of the sun, he is waiting for the next tarot gathering, allowing him to sneak above the gray fog, like a virus or a Trojan horse. When that happens, my control over this mysterious space might be snatched away. He's truly a blasphemer. Fortunately, Little Sun is rather naive and straightforward, so he immediately reported this to me. Through the corresponding crimson stars and the power of the gray fog, I was able to discover his peculiar state. Klein drew a breath and tried to calm himself. At that moment he had to respond. He had to quickly think of a way to get Amon out of the sun, or temporarily expel the sun out of the tarot gathering. Looking at himself from his beyonder powers of magician, clown and seer, to Azek's copper whistle, the Dark Emperor card, the all-black eye, the sun brooch, the biological poison bottle, and so on, Klein couldn't find a way to deal with Amon. Amon's sequence is definitely above sequence 4, and the means available to him must be sufficiently strange. To be able to escape from the City of Silver's mystical artifacts and powerful demon hunters, it means that he isn't something which can be easily eliminated with ordinary objects or powers. After thinking for a moment and looking around, Klein discovered there was only one possibility of eliminating Amon. The gray fog, this mysterious space. I have to think of a way to pry its power away. The sacrifice and bestowment ritual from before are examples. With this train of thought, Klein turned his gaze to the Book of Secrets. This mysticism book, which originated from the ancient shaman King Klarman, recorded many mysterious rituals that required help from the primitive moon. Klein, who had been reading it before, vaguely remembered that a few of them were suitable for such a scenario. Of course, it was unknown what changes he would have to make after directing it towards the Fool. He could only keep his hopes up and try his best. As Klein flipped through the book, his eyes stopped at a ritual. Blood Moon Sacrifice. This ritualistic magic was clearly different from the simple ones that Klein had learned before, and it used the element of a secret deed. The process was to use a material rich in spirituality, preferably the blood of a beyonder, to write the honorable name of the target of the secret deed on an animal hide, and to draw the corresponding symbols and magic labels. If necessary, the specific circumstances of a given time and place also had to be taken into account. When this was done, the ritual host would set up the altar, pick up the piece of hide and repeat the honorable name, letting their spirituality to seep into the hide, gradually spreading it out, little by little to form a hidden bond with the corresponding great being, and obtaining the corresponding spiritual experience or help. The final outcome of this ritual was unknown. It all depended on what the hidden or great being bestowed. Or rather, according to one's characteristics, the knowledge and power one could gain through that secret bond were also different. This kind of rather vague and subjective ritual gave Klein enough freedom to modify and manipulate it. If he had assumed the stance of forcefully eliminating Amon from the beginning, then Amon would have certainly resisted and created a dangerous accident. If the target of the secret deed were the true creator or the hidden sage, it's normal for the ritual to end in madness. Klein mumbled as he conjured a pen and paper and began to modify the Blood Moon Sacrifice to turn it into a secret deed ritual that belonged to the Fool. First, he replaced the honorable name with the 3 sentences of King of Yellow and Black. Then he replaced the symbolic symbol with the one behind the seat of the Fool. It was a unique symbol made up of a part of the hidden pupilless eye and the contorted lines. The third was to design the corresponding magic label according to the symbols and his mysticism knowledge. This was the most difficult step. Any mistakes would cause the entire ritual to produce unpredictable developments. Lastly, he had to modify the layout of the altar to make it closer to the Fool and to the King of Yellow and Black. After busying himself for quite a while, Klein had a new secret deed ritual, but he was unsure if it would work. He examined it over and over again, and after confirming that there were no mistakes, he emanated his spirituality and heavily replied to Little Sun, "I'm aware. I have something to task you with. Let's see if this ritual works." The son Derek suddenly woke up from his dreamless slumber. Before his eyes were the boundless gray fog and the lofty Fool. His ears echoed with bits of illusory and distant words. He knew that Mr. Fool would occasionally ask the members of the Tarot Club to make small attempts as if to verify something. He wasn't surprised by this, and he immediately sat up and began to search for a monster hide, exotic herbs, and other objects. As for the spiritual materials described in the ceremony, Derek didn't waste time heading to the spire or the underground market to buy them. He picked up the axe of Hurricane and sliced a tiny wound in his arm. Silently, he used his own blood as ink, and he wrote the name of the Fool and its corresponding symbols and magic labels on the pitted monster hide. After a while, he put down the quill that was stained with blood. He saw many mysterious symbols on the hide, and the colors were bright red and had an indescribable hint of demonic dealings. After dealing with the wound on his arm, the pale-faced Derek quickly finished setting up the altar. He picked up the blood-red word and all kinds of terrifying symbols from the hide and held it tightly in his hand. He looked at the flickering candle flame in front of him, closed his eyes, lowered his head, and repeatedly recited the honorable names of the Fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Derek's spirituality slowly flowed out and infused the hide, and the words in Jotun and the magic symbols on it quickly brightened. It was a startling crimson color. At that moment, he who had already entered into a cogitation state was only feeling his psyche gradually dissipate as it floated to an immeasurable height, coming into contact with the grayish-white fog and the hidden great being. Above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. Noticing that the sun had not shown any signs of delay in preparing the ritual, Klein chose to wait there above the gray fog. Suddenly, he felt the entire mysterious space start to tremble. That motionless grayish-white fog started to flow. The crimson star corresponding to the sun shined brightly and emitted illusory rays of light like the tide. These countless rays of light condensed into a blurry figure of the sun. He was in a supplicating position with his eyes closed and his head lowered, waiting for the moment when he could bond with the great being and gain a miraculous spiritual experience. The translucent figure on his body was still tightly coiled like a python, but its head was already tilted back as it looked up. The crystal monocle it wore flashed dimly. He's searching for the subtle, hidden connection. He should have recognized that this is just a secret deed ritual, but he didn't do anything to stop it. Is he trying to find the connection through it? Klein suddenly came to this realization and felt the gray fog and the mysterious space above it simultaneously rippling with power. However, for the time being, Klein couldn't combine these forces with his own spirituality to create a beyonder effect that could exorcise the evil spirit, unless there was another corresponding ritual. Clearly this was impossible. He couldn't maintain two rituals simultaneously. Klein's eyes quickly swept the area in front of him, and his gaze stopped at the sun brooch. Perhaps I can use it as a bridge. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, his right hand grabbed the sunbird-shaped dark golden brooch. At the same time, he used his spirituality as a whirlpool to attract the pride power from the mysterious space towards him, making it surge towards the sun brooch like a tidal wave. The quivering above the gray fog became obvious. Little dots of pure light intertwined and swept toward Klein, blending with his spirituality. The sunbird-shaped dark golden brooch began to glow with a dazzling brilliance. It grew brighter and denser, and in an instant drop after drop of a translucent golden liquid began to condense. The liquid quickly merged together and formed a human figure that was as tall as Klein. It was a golden figure, a sacred figure. Does work. Sun holy water that's created from a higher level of power is closer to a god's bestowment. Klein's heart was filled with joy. He turned his gaze back to the crimson star which symbolized the sun. He then looked at the figure that was waiting to bond with the great being. As for the divine figure condensed by the golden sun holy water, it wasn't a result of the sun brooch, but simply a manifestation of Klein's subconscious thoughts. Reaching this step, he had already allowed the golden figure to move forward. Through the illusory crimson star, It merged with Little Sun through the secret deed ritual as it dispelled the evil spirit hidden inside his body, as well as giving him a certain amount of knowledge and a miraculous spiritual experience. However, Klein didn't have much confidence at that very moment. The power of the mysterious space was obviously higher than his spirituality, making him unable to smoothly control the power. As such, the power of the golden figure was mixed, chaotic, and insufficiently coordinated. If he used it as is, the effect was, at most, 10% of what he expected. As for Amon, who was suspected to be a descendant of the ancient sun god, he was born into a family of blasphemers in the Tudor Empire's fourth epoch. Even if it wasn't his main body, he was able to successfully hide his identity from the powerful high-sequence demon hunter and the powerful mystical items that protected the existence of the City of Silver. Klein truly didn't have much confidence with the effect only amounting to 10%. His initial plan was only to give it a try. If it really didn't work, he would temporarily bar the sun and then reconnect with him when he found a better solution. However, having come this far, Klein naturally wanted the best outcome and strived to succeed in one go. Having disguised himself as the godlike fool, he too had a little pride and he wanted to keep up his reputation. He gave a self-deprecating laugh as he prepared to find a way to increase the effects of the golden figure to dispel the evil entity at the last moment. Of course, I can only waste a few seconds. Otherwise, the ritual would be over. Klein's eyes swept over the items on the long bronze table again, thinking only of the words high level. Due to his spirituality's intuition as a seer, his gaze landed on an item. The card of blasphemy, the Dark Emperor card. Of all the items Klein owned, it was the only one that matched the words high level. As for Azek's copper whistle, Klein clearly remembered that it had been completely suppressed when the Blackthorn Security Company faced off with the spawn of the evil god. However, what the Dark Emperor card's high level pertains to is the knowledge contained inside. That's not right. After the owner advances to become a high-sequence Beyonder, it can produce subtle responses with the Beyonder ingredients that are needed. Furthermore, it also possesses the characteristics of anti-divination and anti-prophecy. In other words, its level isn't low. I don't need to use it for a fight as long as I can use its high level to suppress the power of this mysterious space above the fog. And if I can minimize the chaotic and unnatural coordination of the golden figure, that will be enough. Klein quickly came up with an idea. He reached out his hand towards the Dark Emperor card which had its back facing up. Just then he noticed a frightening seam through the corner of his eyes. Within the shadow of the sun that was formed by the illusory rays of the crimson star, a palm so shriveled that only skin and bones remained, was suddenly reaching forward. Slowly but firmly, it grabbed at the boundary of the crimson star, giving off a feeling as if it was piercing through reality and entering the psyche domain. Amon was attempting to use the connection to rip open the boundary and extend his hand into the gray fog. Whoosh! For the first time, the endless grayish-white fog was in chaos. The flowing from before seemed to turn into waves as gales formed. Klein's pupils shrank. He no longer hesitated and he picked up the Dark Emperor card. As soon as he held this item in his hand, he immediately felt that his spirituality was no longer subdued by the power of the mysterious space. Suddenly, the golden figure became abnormally tall, and on its back, it grew pairs of enormous pitch-black wings. There were a total of 12 pairs. On each pair of wings, there were dark and bright feathers engraved with many mysterious symbols. The contrast between gold and black was stark, and the huge figure driven by Klein spread its wings to cover the vast dome of the towering palace. Without a sound, the sacred yet corrupted figure of light and darkness flashed over, overlapping with the manifestation of Little Sun that was formed by the crimson star. The light and shadows intersected and a fierce wind blew in all directions. The palm that was so shriveled that it didn't have any flesh, to the point of only having skin and bones left, shrank backward uncontrollably, but it also firmly refused to retreat. It was like a man falling off a cliff who had extended his hand to grab a bulge, unwilling to let go regardless of what happened. Whoosh! In the midst of the illusory and chaotic sounds, light and darkness completely erupted. The shriveled hand finally lost its support, and it plummeted, constantly disintegrating and disappearing as it did. After a few seconds, the gray fog and the mysterious space above it returned to its previous tranquility, as if no one had stepped inside for thousands of years. Klein focused again and saw that the blurry figure of Little Sun was no longer entangled with the twisted and incorporeal entity. Unable to stop himself, he heaved a sigh of relief. Then he conjured the contrasting image from before and threw them at the manifested figure of Little Sun in the crimson rays of light, allowing him to fully comprehend them. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek felt both awake and adrift at the same time. It was as if he could see shadows of ineffable shapes, different colors of light that contained endless knowledge, and a majestic, tall, golden figure looking down upon everything. This figure stood beside Mr. Fool in the thick gray fog, with 12 pairs of huge, dark, mysterious wings on his back. Not only did his body and mind become warm and pure, but he also seemed to understand what was called sunlight. He had even figured out holy water creation as well as the knowledge to exorcise evil spirits. It also contained images he couldn't understand, such as a towering, hidden pyramidal mausoleum. In that intoxicating spiritual experience, it was as if he had returned to his most carefree childhood, to the lands where the sun shone in his imagination, and it was only when everything was gone and the simple furnishings of his room came into view that he snapped back to his senses. Is this the secret deed ritual as referenced in textbooks? For more than 2,000 years, no one in the City of Silver has succeeded before. No one has been able to come into contact with a mighty existence. At that moment, Derek's low spirits and loneliness lessened. A heartfelt smile beamed on his face. The Fool's so-called experiment was to confirm whether our City of Silver's environment can perform a secret deed ritual. That wondrous feeling of all that knowledge was the payment he gave me? Derek lowered his head again and said with great respect, "Thank you, Mr. Fool." Right at this moment, a grayish-white fog suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. In the center of the fog was a lofty chair. It was the leisurely seated Fool. Then, Derek saw himself covered in a transparent, illusory shadow. The figure wore a black classic robe, a matching pointed hat, and a crystal monocle hung from its face. It coiled around his body like a python. This Amon wasn't dead. He evaded the detection of the mystical items and the attention of His Excellency, and he became a parasite on my spirit body. Derek's eyes widened and he saw himself as he was now, no longer entangled by Amon. Did Mr. Fool notice him and finish him? Derek's sunken heart calmed down while cold sweat trickled down his forehead due to the lingering fear. His face, on the other hand, displayed an expression of instinctive reverence. He subconsciously followed the words described in the mythology course and said, "Praise you, the mighty Mr. Fool." Somewhere in the deep darkness, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the surroundings. This was a plain that was filled with ravines, and a dark green single-eyed giant was wandering about subconsciously. His eyes were lifeless and his face was covered with traces of rotting pus. Grayish-yellow gas permeated from his body and interwoven in the air, forming many clouds. And beneath his feet, in the darkest ravine on the plain, there was a figure standing at the edge overlooking the land below. With the help of the lightning, a thick and broad grayish-white building could be vaguely seen at the bottom of the ravine. The figure was dressed in a black classic robe and a pointed cap of the same color. It had curly black hair, black eyes, a broad forehead and thin cheeks. It looked identical to the phantom Derek Berg had seen. He raised his hand and pinched the crystal monocle. Then he turned his head to the left and looked into the distance. As expected, he suddenly whispered in the language of ancient Fasak. After pausing for a moment, the man smiled and said the words, "The Fool." Before he finished speaking, he had already jumped into the ravine in front of him. At this moment, the lightning subsided for a second, and darkness completely enveloped the world. After eliminating the fatal threat, Klein returned to the real world, once again feeling the urgent need to advance his sequence. The Amon that I eliminated wasn't the main body. If he truly is interested in the mysterious space above the gray fog, he will soon return to the City of Silver. At that time, I wonder if the 2 legendary mystical items and the 3 demon hunters will be able to stop him. For a mere clone to be so bizarre and terrifying, one can imagine how powerful his main body is. Therefore, I need to conclude the rest of the magician rules as soon as possible and, through digestion and advancement, better grasp the mysterious space above the gray. Perhaps the City of Silver's shepherd elder will be used. She really is corrupted by the true creator. Klein opened the bathroom door and went down to the first floor while in deep thought. What about the rest of the magician's rules? As Klein idly leafed through the newspaper he had finished reading, he thought about the issues that mattered most to him. He had already considered one point before, and that was the difference between having an audience to cheer for him and not having one. However, just this alone didn't seem sufficient. With this thought, Klein's thoughts ran wild as he inexplicably thought of something. When I was still a seer, being recognized and praised as a true fortune-teller would give me a feeling that the process of digesting the magic potion had become faster. After I concluded the seer principles, I began to believe that there was no direct correlation between the views and feedback from others and that they were merely expressions, nothing substantial. If I act well enough, I would naturally be acknowledged and my digestion would naturally be faster. That is to say, I had always believed that they were two different responses with the same gains, and not something related to causality. But now there's the choice of receiving an audience's applause. If it does help me digest the potion, does it mean that some performances really require feedback, and the way that others view me can subtly affect the progress of my potion's digestion? By extension, would the establishment of the churches by the 7 Orthodox gods, the spreading of their faith and the nurturing of their followers partially be a result of this? This is truly a sacrilegious thought. I am indeed not a person who sincerely worships gods. I will praise them, but I won't blindly believe in them. Klein quickly adjusted his train of thought as he searched for another angle of attack. He repeatedly compared the subtle differences between seer, clown, and magician. Gradually he came up with an idea. In comparison, does a magician who needs to perform possess the need to take the initiative? Taking the initiative to perform instead of being passive like a seer or clown. From the perspective of fate, it also fits. From a seer's reverence of fate, a clown's characteristic of being teased by fate while still maintaining a smile, and finally a magician who takes the initiative to challenge fate. Even if the result is nothing real or substantial, he will still receive the audience's applause from his deception. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he planned to make attempts in taking the initiative to perform. Where should I start? It should be something relatively less dangerous. I can consider the imprisonment of that vampire named Emlyn White by Father Utravsky. However, I need to confirm that this group of non-humans abide by the law and only engage in petty theft at the worst. Where do Emlyn's companions stay on the southern side of the bridge? I can't really remember. I'll have to use divination to jog my memories. I'll also confirm how dangerous it is. Having come to this conclusion, Klein put down the newspaper, got up and went upstairs. It had to be said that he didn't have any other motivation to actively involve himself in something that had almost nothing to do with him. It wasn't his personality, but in order to act he had to force himself to do so. This is considered rather simple for me. How would a straight male act as a witch and demoness of pleasure? It's no wonder the City of Silver emphasizes that you're only acting. Klein suddenly understood the meaning of the admonition. City of Silver, in a dark room at the top of the spire. Chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad, stood in front of a window, staring at the Silver City which was shrouded in darkness and lightning. Those beams of light illuminated his disheveled white hair, revealing his twisted and hideous old scars on his face, as well as the deep wrinkles on his face and his worried eyes. After an unknown period of time, Colin turned and looked at a dark corner. He asked in a deep voice, "Find anything?" In the corner a shadow stood up. It was pitch black as it shot towards the wall, twisting and whirling. Its voice carried the feeling of metal rubbing against metal, and it was rather jarring to the ears. After Derek Berg returned home, he showed some signs of abnormality, but there was no immediate need to deal with it. Colin nodded slightly and said, "What did he do?" With the help of the mystical item at the bottom of the spire, the rampager and the clone of the mysterious figure were eliminated. However, he had constantly suspected that the matter had not been completely resolved. The former captain of the exploration team suddenly lost control. The mysterious person recklessly took action after enduring for a full 42 years, without any consideration for the traps or the consequences. All of this made Colin, who had killed and hunted many monsters, instinctively feel that something was amiss. Therefore he believed that this was a deliberate choice made by the mysterious man. Although the real purpose of the mysterious man was still unknown, he definitely had some sort of follow-up method, and it wouldn't be so simple to get rid of him. After using his demon hunter powers and finding no abnormalities, he deliberately pretended to be deceived and directly permitted the youth named Derek Berg to return home. However, he had secretly sent someone to monitor the situation closely. This was completely different from the detention and observation method which Colin had used in the past. It was a change he had no choice but to make. The black shadow that was slightly gyrating replied. After he entered the room, he sat on the edge of the bed and muttered to himself for quite a while. As I was afraid that the mysterious man would discover me, I didn't get too close so I couldn't clearly hear what was being said. However, I can confirm that this is an abnormal sign. After talking to himself, Derek seemed to become very tired and fell asleep very quickly. But after a short nap he suddenly woke up and conducted a ritual. I suspect that his mind wasn't lucid while doing so and that he was controlled by the mysterious man. By the way, the ritual had elements of a secret deed. Colin pondered for a while and said with a solemn expression, as expected, perhaps he was communicating with his main body via this method. What exactly is his purpose? Why did he spend his 42 years at the bottom of the spire in peace? The black shadow naturally couldn't answer this question as it continued. After the ritual, Derek no longer showed any abnormal behavior. Does this matter need to be dealt with immediately? If that mysterious person's main body is attracted here, we might not be able to deal with him. Colin remained silent for a few seconds before saying, continue the observation. That mysterious person has yet to show any substantial malice, so our reaction can't be too intense. Sai, do you remember that prophecy? It's almost time for disaster to befall. The further we explore, the more strange ruins we find, and the more dangerous the items we harvest. By your will, Your Excellency. The black shadow slowly retreated back into the ground and disappeared. At this moment in the Berg household, Derek began to cough so violently that his heart seemed to almost burst. Cough, cough, cough. He crouched down and coughed non-stop until his throat began to itch and he coughed out something. Splat. A translucent object slid across his throat and fell to the ground. It was a worm with the length and thickness of a finger. There were some transparent areas on its body forming rings. Derek had seen something like this at the bottom of the spire previously, and he was certain that he was already free of Amon's influence. He bent down and picked up the translucent worm and finally he was able to count the total number of rings on its body. There were a total of 12. What is its use? What can it be used for? It seems to be dead. Derek lost himself in thought. Winter County in the northern part of the Lone Kingdom. A black Gothic cathedral towered over the snow-covered mountains as it occupied a vast stretch of land. In front of it was a cliff, and its surroundings was a vast expanse of whiteness with utmost silence. This was the Church of the Evernight Goddess's headquarters, known as the Cathedral of Serenity. The dark-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell had a black windbreaker draped over him as he wore red gloves and walked out of his room. Having successfully advanced and stabilized himself, he hadn't been given the opportunity to participate in any operations yet, as well as some exercises and so-called mysticism courses. After going around a corner, Leonard saw a staircase leading down. There he saw Captain Dunn Smith with a pair of dark gray eyes and dressed in a black windbreaker, and Klein Moretti, who exuded a bookish demeanor standing there, smiling and waiting. He tilted his head back and sighed. My memory has also gotten worse. I've already forgotten that the two of you no longer exist. Leonard looked away and walked down the stairs to the first floor of the cathedral. He knocked on the door and entered a small room. There were chairs in the room and some nighthawks wearing red gloves sat around inside. Leonard found a seat at random and sat down, smiling as he chatted with his friends. After a while, the high-ranking deacon, Crestet Sesamir, with his propped-up collar covering his chin and lips, walked in, sat right in front and said to the crowd, "Today's class will inform you of things you need to pay attention to. As Red Gloves, you will travel to different places, and there's a high chance of encountering dangerous high-sequence beyonders. If their intent is obvious and they want to kill you, the only thing you can do is leave a trail behind you so that the subsequent investigators will be able to find the appropriate clues. The exact methods include, but most of the time high-sequence beyonders won't always attack you directly. They will utilize you based on all sorts of factors. You must be alert enough to not be fooled, and here are a few things that we have summarized." Sitting in the back, Leonard listened with a smile and great attentiveness. His target for revenge was a high-sequence beyonder. Sesamir paused for 2 seconds and continued. In the first case, some high-sequence beyonder will pretend to be hidden existences, using promises and hope to deceive you into reciting his corresponding description. In the second case, some high-sequence beyonders might be restrained in a sealed state. They will act as mystical items that can help you get out of your predicament. For example, a magic lamp that can grant you 3 wishes or a wishing pond. The third case is for a high-sequence potion named Parasite. They often claim that they have lost their bodies and can only survive together with your spirit body. They can only rely on you and will not harm you. They will then give you knowledge, formulas, and all sorts of benefits, hoping that you can become powerful so that you can one day help him reconstruct his body or take revenge. In reality, the beyonders with parasites will only become nutrients for the parasite, thus prolonging the parasite's lifespan and condition. As Leonard listened, his smile faded. The Cathedral of Serenity looked particularly beautiful at night. It complemented with the crimson moon high up in the sky that coldly illuminated the land. Leonard entered his single room, took off his 2 red gloves and tossed them onto a wooden table. With a grim look, he sat in front of the patterned glass window, his back facing out as he bathed in the moonlight. After 10 seconds of silence, he said softly, almost gritting his teeth, "So you're a parasite." Leonard's voice echoed faintly in his own ears, muffled by obvious anger, tension, a sense of loss and fear. In the blink of an eye, a slightly aged voice resounded in his mind. "You can say that. What exactly do you want? Are you a being that's leeching my life through your parasitic means? Or are you waiting for me to become stronger so you can directly devour my beyonder characteristic, just like cultivating a humanoid potion?" Leonard's voice was suppressed but in no way slow. "It was only after you met with the spawn of the true creator and suffered a setback were you willing to advance to sequence 7. Your regret has made you hallucinate. Leonard, think about it carefully. Would I not understand the Church of the Evernight Goddess? When I dealt with them, even the so-called Cheneys hadn't even been born yet. Would I not know that the Church of the Evernight Goddess knows of parasites? Would I not realize that the red gloves would grasp certain secrets to prevent the infiltration of high-sequence beyonders? But did I ever stop you from joining the red gloves?" After a few brief changes in expression, Leonard finally fell silent, saying nothing. The voice in his mind laughed again. "Do you feel like you have aged faster than your real age? No, right? I can live for at least another 100 years. I'm not in a hurry to take over my host's life. As for your beyonder characteristics, humph. We aren't even in a similar pathway that allows exchanging. If I swallow it, it would be equivalent to drinking poison, making me half crazy and increasing my chance of losing control. Do you think that I would do that? Evernight is grouped with Giant and Death, while my beyonder pathway's goal is that of the Apprentice and Seer." Leonard looked at his body, which was illuminated by the crimson moonlight. After some thought, he asked again, "What exactly do you want to do? What is your purpose?" The slightly aged voice in his mind sighed. "Didn't I already tell you? I've suffered tremendous damage and I need a host to recover slowly, and I have to hide from a terrible enemy. The Nighthawks, the Church of the Evernight Goddess, is quite a good choice for a host." Leonard lifted his head, looked at the ceiling for a few seconds and said in a deep voice, "Will you be discovered by the Archbishop's high-ranking deacons or other sealed artifacts?" The slightly aged voice replied leisurely, "If parasites were so easily discovered, that high-ranking deacon named Sesamir wouldn't have just given a warning and not send all of you to be checked. Of course, parasites do leave traces. The Church of the Evernight Goddess has the means to determine this, but it's relatively complicated and troublesome. It will cause certain losses and substantial danger. It might even affect that goddess, so before you become a high-ranking deacon, making you qualified to participate in meetings for the upper echelons of the church, and interact with Grade 0 sealed artifacts, there's no need to worry. By then, I should have recovered and embarked on my own journey." Leonard listened with a serious expression. After a while he said, "You have a terrifying enemy? Who is he?" The slightly aged voice chuckled and said, "I don't know his name, but I do know his last name." "What is it?" Leonard asked. The slightly aged voice suddenly became low and deep. "Amon. The area south of the bridge, 46 River Bay Avenue." The owners of the house that were enjoying their dinner heard the tinkling of the doorbell. The only maid came to the door, and through the peephole above the door's lock, she saw a policeman in a black and white checkered uniform. She opened the door and asked somewhat fearfully, "Sir, is there anything I can do for you?" The cop was none other than the disguised Klein, who was attempting to take the initiative to perform. He was here to confirm that the partners of the vampire Emlyn White, the ones living at 48 River Bay Avenue, and the people who entrusted Stewart with the mission were law-abiding monsters. Yes, law-abiding monsters. Although this doesn't sound right and sounds a little funny, it's how I would react with my true thoughts. Klein emphasized in his heart. The police uniform he wore wasn't a fake that he specially tailored. It was a product of his ordinary clothes and hallucinatory effects. A magician had to do what a magician would do. Klein didn't monitor 48 River Bay Avenue because he believed that Emlyn White's companions had long since moved away. As monsters and non-humans, moving to another residence was the most basic thing to do after a comrade disappears for several days. They had to suspect that Emlyn White was captured by the Nighthawks, the mandated Punishers or other official Beyonder organizations, and it was necessary to assume that he might be dead at any moment. Therefore, what Klein wanted to do was to perform an investigation by conducting a survey. He maintained the arrogance of a low-ranking policeman towards an ordinary citizen. Without taking off his hat, he slightly raised his chin and said, "I have something to ask your master." The maid entered in a fluster and quickly brought back a man in his 30s wearing a thick shirt. "Officer, what would you like to ask me?" the man asked nervously. Klein stood at the door and looked inside. "Do you know the residents of Unit 48? "I do." The male owner was stunned for a moment before asking, "What happened to them?" "They're involved in a case." "You have to tell me everything you know," Klein said with a straight face. His face was also disguised, augmented with slight hallucinatory effects. It was to ensure that he looked distinct from the great detective Sherlock Moriarty. The male owner suddenly came to a realization. It's no wonder they moved away so hurriedly more than a month ago. Most of the residents of River Bay Avenue and the neighborhood knew the Whites and their son. He was a handsome but eccentric young man. Mr. White is an excellent physician and is good at using all kinds of medicine and bloodletting therapy. Bloodletting therapy? Klein returned with a question. Yes, although this has been regarded by many newspapers and magazines as an old medical skill that had no effect, anyone who received Mr. White's treatment were cured. However, Mr. White also said that except for him, the other doctors who practice bloodletting therapy are quacks. The owner gave his viewpoint. The bloodletting therapy is to accumulate food for themselves, isn't it? The only thing that is useful was the medicine. This vampire family relied on bloodletting therapy to help treat patients while receiving food as compensation. If there weren't many patients, or if their blood was very unhealthy, would they consider going to a distant hospital to steal blood from a blood bag and drink it? For such monsters they really are law-abiding. Klein nodded in understanding. The emotional color changes in his spirit vision told him that the man wasn't lying. Seeing that the police officer didn't refute him, the man continued, "Mr. White and his wife are very nice people. Although they can't cure those who are seriously ill, they're still pretty good doctors for all the residents who live nearby." Was their child Emlyn involved in a case? That young man was too silent, as though he looked down on us. "He's always hiding at home and I have no idea what he's doing." "Sir, are you hot? It's so cold outside." "He probably just hides in the day and comes out at night." Klein wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "I've been walking around here all day because of this case." Next, according to his design survey, he learned everything about the Whites and their son. One family at a time, he knocked on the door, asked questions, compiled answers, and came to the conclusion that the White family was indeed kind, amiable, and law-abiding. It doesn't seem like a description of a vampire. Klein looked up at the crimson moon which was piercing through the clouds, ready to make a final confirmation. He removed the hallucinatory effect from his body and started divining. After making sure there was no danger, he went around to the side and climbed into the house at 48 River Bay Avenue. Others might not know who had taken Emlyn White away, ultimately afraid of being followed up by an official visit from official Beyonders. But Klein knew what was going on and wasn't worried about a trap. As he entered the second floor, he used the moonlight to see that the rooms were in disarray. Many things hadn't been taken away. Through these things he could imagine the haste in which their owners had left. He even found some precious books on herbs in a study, including some popular countryside folk recipes. As he walked, Klein entered one of the bedrooms and shadows came into view. He jumped in fright, imagining that he had been ambushed. He almost snapped his fingers to light the match that had been thrown outside. Fortunately, no attacks occurred. The crimson moonlight shone through the window, covering the entire room. Klein was finally able to clearly see what those black shadows were. They didn't have any spiritual luster and they were figurines of varying sizes. The biggest one was only slightly shorter than Klein. It was a girl wearing a gorgeous long skirt. Her sleeves and collars were covered with lace and ribbons. This female figurine was obviously more like one of wax. Her facial features were vivid and lifelike, and her golden hair and red eyes were alluring and beautiful. The smallest one was only the size of a normal person's palm. It was a woman wearing silver body armor. She looked valiant and heroic while looking magnanimous and beautiful. As his eyes swept past each figurine, Klein suddenly remembered something. Under the influence of Roselle, the development of figurine art had two trends. One was the adorable type, allowing them to have a change of clothes, while the other strove to be more realistic. Klein looked around and couldn't help but exclaim, "These figurines are not cheap. Don't tell me Emlyn is a vampire who is obsessed with figurines?" After a thorough inspection, Klein confirmed that there was nothing odd about the White family and that the couple didn't even leave a single strand of hair behind, apparently to prevent anyone from tracking them down using divination. He returned to the bedroom filled with dolls, took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog, intending to use divination for a final confirmation. However, before he got down to business, he conjured the female figurine who was nearly his height, and just like how he had done a divination for the mutated sun's sacred emblem in Tingen City, he picked up a dark red fountain pen and wrote a sentence on the yellowish-brown goat skin: "Its origin." Putting down the pen and holding onto the piece of paper, Klein leaned back in his chair and began to mumble as he slowly adjusted his mental state into a cogitation state. After repeating this 7 times, his eyes turned dark, and his eyelids drooped as he entered a deep slumber. In the gray space, he saw the puppet craftsman working with extraordinary concentration. He saw the red-eyed girl being placed in the room of dolls and Emlyn White fishing out his wallet with his eyes fixed on her. Finally, the scene stopped inside the bedroom where Klein was presently located. The proud vampire Emlyn White, with his hair combed back diagonally, looked handsome but slightly delicate. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the doll affectionately, along with all the other puppets of different sizes. He truly is a fanatic of figurines. Klein opened his eyes and facepalmed. Soon after, he waved his hand, causing the puppet that he conjured to vanish from the space above the gray fog. When he was done, he picked up his fountain pen again and wrote another divination statement: "Scenes of death in the last 10 years in 48 River Bay Avenue." According to the statements from the residents, the White family had been there for no more than 10 years, so Klein was able to lock onto a specific area. And he believed that if the White family were just superficially good monsters who were actually making disappearance cases all the time in order to suck warm, delicious blood, then it was impossible to not have any happen at home. In a period as long as 10 years, there would always be a few accidents as long as they didn't stop. After carefully checking the divination sentence, Klein recited it and entered cogitation again, rapidly falling into a dream. In the dusky world, his vision was sometimes pitch black, sometimes dotted with snowflakes and sometimes splintered. However, no scenes appeared. This was the result of the divination. Nothing. No one had died in the last 10 years at 48 River Bay Avenue. By taking into account all the factors involved, it's possible to make a preliminary conclusion that the White family was a law-abiding vampire family, other than a few instances of petty theft. As Klein looked at the long mottled bronze table in front of him, he wrapped himself with his spirituality and plummeted into the gray fog. Returning to the real world, he carefully removed the traces he had left behind and left 48 River Bay Avenue. Instead of making his final conclusion, he took a detour to the River Bay police station, where he easily sneaked into the archives by mixing himself in among the thieves and drunkards, allowing them to serve as a foil for his disguise. There he boldly lit the gas lamps inside. Then Klein pulled out the last 10 years of missing persons records and paged through them. From time to time, the police officers on duty would pass by the door, but their eyes didn't notice any light leaking out from the archives. There's nothing suspicious at all. After an unknown period of time, the black-gloved Klein placed the docket back. Then he turned off the gas lamp, took off his hat in the darkness, pressed his hand to his chest and bowed towards the lobby. On his way back to Minsk Street, Klein took a shower, changed his clothes, sat down at his desk and spread out the map of Backlund that he had first bought on the steam locomotive. The first thing he did was find Rose Street, which was on the south side of the bridge where the Harvest Church was located. This was where Father Yutravsky was the bishop of the cathedral and had Emlyn White imprisoned in his basement. Soon after, Klein's gaze moved as he familiarized himself with the names and layout of the surrounding streets. A performance can't be done too hastily or with an excessive thirst for success. One has to slowly immerse the audience into the act. Klein whispered, unfolding a piece of paper and lowering his pen. The first thing he did was find Rose Street, which was on the south side of the bridge where the Harvest Church was located. This was where Father Yutravsky was the bishop of the cathedral and had Emlyn White imprisoned in his basement. Soon after, Klein's gaze moved as he familiarized himself with the names and layout of the surrounding streets. A performance can't be done too hastily or with an excessive thirst for success. One has to slowly immerse the audience into the act. Klein whispered, unfolding a piece of paper and lowering his pen. Tuesday morning, the weather remained as cold as it usually was this season. Klein tightened the collar of his tweed coat, put on his hat and pulled open the door. He was heading to the end of the street where the mailbox was, to post a letter to Detective Stewart. Since it wasn't that far, there was no need to dress neatly or heavily, but Klein had just recovered from his cold, so he had wrapped himself up thickly just in case. Perhaps it was because of the strong wind last night, but the air in Backland was surprisingly good. Klein subconsciously slowed down his pace and enjoyed this rare morning. As he passed Jürgen's house, he heard the oriel window creak open and instinctively turned to look. Standing at the window was Mrs. Doris, wearing a black plush hat and a thick grayish-blue scarf. She looked even worse than before and her body was even more hunched. "Good morning, Detective Moriarty. Thank you for taking care of Brody. He said you were a good man, didn't you, Brody?" Old Granny Doris bent down and picked up the black cat with green eyes. Brody used all 4 of his limbs and struggled in her embrace. Finally, he jumped down and lightly landed on the windowsill. But instead of leaving, he circled around and around, nuzzling Mrs. Doris with its head on one side, without even looking at Klein. Was he being friend-zoned by a cat? Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and smiled sincerely. "It's a happy deed, and even more delightful news is that you've recovered and have been discharged from the hospital." After exchanging a few pleasantries, he said goodbye and continued to walk down the street with a smile on his face. He had only taken a few steps when he heard Mrs. Doris call after him. "When Jürgen comes back, I'll have him pay you." "Do I look like I took this mission for the money?" The smile on Klein's face suddenly froze. He could only half turn around and wave his hand, indicating that he understood. When he was far away from Jürgen's house, his expression gradually turned serious and he sighed faintly. He had just activated his spirit vision to look at Mrs. Doris's aura and found that her situation wasn't too good. It wasn't only because of her old age but also because of the cold weather and bad air in Backland. All of these had a very bad effect on her lung disease. Mrs. Doris should be able to make it through this late autumn and winter, but it will be hard to say for the next one or the next one. If she wants to live for a few more years, she would have to move to the south, to the area around Desi Bay. It's a pity that it's likely that lawyer Jürgen can't afford to do so now. "Even I haven't been to Desi Bay." Klein mumbled, came to the mailbox and stuffed the letter in. This was the prelude to his performance. And this evening he would head to the Harvest Church as a detective and do the rest of the preparations. After buying a Desi pie for breakfast, Klein returned via his original path and was quite at ease. Before he got close to the house, he saw an elegantly decorated carriage parked outside. 2 ladies in black hats and a ribbon were anxiously pulling on his doorbell, while the maids and bodyguards were scattered around, as though they were on guard against something. "Mrs. Stellan." "Ma'am Mary. Do they have something to entrust me with?" "They look very anxious." With the paper bag containing the Desi pie in hand, Klein approached and said with a laugh, "Ladies, it should be time for breakfast." When they turned back to see Detective Sherlock Moriarty, Ma'am Mary was visibly relieved. "Mr. Detective, you have to help me." In Klein's spirit vision, there was nothing fake about her anxiety, nervousness and fear. Therefore he nodded his head, pointed at the door and said, "Let's talk inside." As he spoke, he glanced at his landlady, Stellan, and he noticed that her condition was entirely different from the past 2 days. She had become very low and dejected, as though she wasn't interested in anything at all. What happened to her? Although his landlady liked to show off a little, she's someone who loves life a lot. Klein took out his key and opened the door. After entering, before she could sit still, Ma'am Mary impatiently said, Detective Moriarty, I received a threatening letter. Threatening letter? Klein put down the Desi pie, clasped his hands and asked, "What does the letter say?" Ma'am Mary glanced sideways at Mrs. Stellan and seeing that she wasn't quite as active as usual, she said after some deliberation, "That letter asked me to handle the smoke of the factory impartially when I carry out the atmospheric pollution investigation and to acknowledge their contributions, or else I would end up like the doll that came with the letter." The doll's head was ripped off and its arms and legs were broken. Ma'am Mary seemed to recall the feeling when she opened the letter, and she said with a trembling voice, "This is the first time I've encountered something like this. I don't know if it will become a reality or not. I didn't know that I would have to experience such cases when I became a member of the investigation council. I didn't know. Ma'am, perhaps Emperor Rizal once said that there are only two ultimate forms of hatred between people. One is to murder the other person's parents, and the other is to destroy another person's means of earning money." Klein solemnly nodded his head and said, "My suggestion is to report it to the police." From his point of view, Ma'am Mary was now a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. Her status was completely different from before, and the police would certainly not take the threats she received lightly. Moreover, this involved the development of a governmental policy and wasn't an ordinary matter, so there was a high probability that the police department would hand the case over to the church's Beyonder organization in order to solve this case as soon as possible. Based on Ma'am Mary's status as a follower of the goddess, the Nighthawks was an inevitable choice. This way, even if Klein wanted a share of the reward, he didn't want to involve himself in it. "I've already done so, but it doesn't reassure me." Ma'am Mary pursed her lips and said, "Do you know what they said? They said that threatening letters were formed by cutting the words from newspapers, and the doll could be bought from anywhere. It would be very difficult to find the sender in a short period of time. And they only sent one policeman to protect me. Goddess, is this how they treat a helpless citizen's cry for help?" Ma'am Mary paused, looked earnestly at Klein and said, "Detective Moriarty, I believe you can help me, not only because of your performance from that matter but also because of Mike's approval, Aaron's praise and Talam's extolment. And I know you made a great contribution in that serial murder case. Don't worry, I will pay you well enough. Your words make me happy, but something doesn't seem right. Unless the police have already been bribed, they would probably transfer the case to the Nighthawks. And with Beyonder means such as divination available, it would be impossible for a letter made up of words from a newspaper to avoid detection. The sender would have either been caught already, or they would have means to interfere with divination. The latter would only lead to a formal and large-scale intervention by the Nighthawks. No matter what the situation is, it will be different from how the situation is handled now." Klein didn't answer Ma'am Mary right away, but he carefully analyzed the abnormality of this matter. The living room suddenly became unusually quiet. The feeling of silence made Ma'am Mary and Mrs. Stellan somewhat uneasy for some unknown reason. At some point in time, Klein had fished out a coin and made it bounce and roll between his fingers, as though it were a habit of his to focus his thoughts. Suddenly, the coin flew up and then fell down steadily onto the palm of his hand, its back facing up. Klein was surprised. He was divining whether this matter involved danger, but it turned out to have none. If such a threat really exists, even if the sender doesn't have considerable abilities, it would still result in a certain degree of danger. It's impossible to have none. Is it just a simple threat? Or... Klein suddenly thought of another possibility as he smiled and said, "Ma'am Mary, don't worry. You can go back home in peace. If someone comes to you in the next 2 days to discuss this issue so as to make it public, allowing the citizens to know the true intentions of those factory owners in order to incite anger among the public, then you will be fine." The possibility which Klein had just thought of was that the threat was a trap set up by the council so as to incite the public to use their anger, allowing the atmospheric pollution investigation to be carried out smoothly and lead to the subsequent bill which could benefit them. This would explain why the police are responding in this manner. "Why do you say that?" Ma'am Mary asked, frowning. Klein smiled and replied, "That's what I've deduced." "And if what you claim doesn't happen in 2 days?" Ma'am Mary pressed. Klein said sincerely, "Then I will provide protection. In any case, there's no danger," he added inwardly. After comforting and sending off Ma'am Mary, he went above the grey fog to confirm the matter and received the same result as before. By then his Desi pie had turned cold. Ma'am Mary returned home with some apprehension and uneasiness. wondering if she should invite Stellan to stay with her for a few days. At that moment her housekeeper informed her that the eldest son of Count Hall, the chief secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, Mr. Hibbert Hall, had come. After both of them entered the living room, before Ma'am Mary could even open her mouth to speak, the handsome blonde gentleman spoke first. "Ma'am Mary, I've heard of what has happened to you. It's a disgrace to Backlund and even to the whole kingdom, and I'm deeply sorry for it. Don't worry, everyone in the committee will stand with you." "Thank you for your concern," Ma'am Mary responded gratefully. After a moment of consideration, Hibbert Hall said, "Ma'am, I wish to get a reporter to interview you regarding this incident. I want to tell everyone about what happened to you and how despicable this act is. I want to let everyone see how outrageous those people who have contaminated Backlund's air are. There's no sign of repentance. Please agree to my request." It's exactly as Detective Moriarty described. Ma'am Mary was momentarily at a loss for words. After breakfast, Klein rested for a while. Since he had nothing better to do, he went above the grey fog in preparation to divine the origin of the biological poison bottle. This time he didn't delay it at all. The stone pillars of the ancient and majestic palace supported the high dome. Klein sat at the end of the long bronze table, holding a translucent brown bottle. He checked it over and over again, but he didn't sense any danger from it. "Let's begin." He conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, its origin. Putting the fountain pen away and bracing himself for a blow, Klein glanced at the paper and the biological poison bottle, leaned back in his chair and entered cogitation while reciting the statement. Soon he entered a hazy gray dream world and saw a dark but spacious room. There were king cobras, black widows, and other strange plants and animals in the room. It was a messy and harrowing scene. A middle-aged man in a white coat was standing in front of a long table in the middle of the room. He threw the snake gall and spider venom into the huge black pot that hung from the ceiling. In the end, he even put in a few items that possessed a strong spiritual luster. For example, they would sometimes disperse into a black gas, and other times condense into dark green lung-shaped objects. Otherwise, they would be in the form of a tube containing a clear azure liquid or fiery red eyes. The air around the black iron pot gradually became viscous. It was gathering towards the center, but it was constantly being pushed aside, making it difficult to achieve its goal. When the white-robed middle-aged man saw this scene, his brow slowly creased, his expression looked slightly anxious. He flipped through the black notebook by his side, gritted his teeth, and used a ritual silver dagger to slice open his wrist. Drops of fresh blood dripped into the black iron pot, seemingly breathing life into its contents instantly. A terrifying suction force suddenly erupted, sucking in all the viscous air around it. The scarlet blood which had yet to leave his wrist was fully sucked into it. And that wasn't everything. Regardless of how the white-robed middle-aged man struggled to resist, or how he revealed a terrified expression, he couldn't prevent his body from approaching the iron pot. His body was stretched, his head was compressed, and amidst his screams he was eaten little by the pot. The hanging specimens, plants, and anything that could move or be moved, all flew into the pot. Brown fog suddenly filled the room, quietly ebbing and flowing. By the time it was all over, the room was empty except for the brown, translucent bottle lying quietly in the middle of the clearing. The scene quickly faded away and the dream world shattered. Klein opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "So the biological poison bottle is a product of a death-seeking experiment. I thought it was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by some Beyonder. If that were the case, I'd have been able to divine a formula." To Klein, a rampager's spirituality and Beyonder characteristic, as well as a spirituality and Beyonder characteristic which was contaminated by an evil god, could all be used to divine a formula. Just like the all-black eye which Nimblewright Master Rosago left behind. It was thanks to the isolation effects of the gray fog, and how the mysterious space was able to eliminate negative influences, giving him the ability to court death. Of course, a Beyonder characteristic involved many other additional factors. In theory, the chances of failure were extremely high, but Klein only had the confidence to do so after advancing to magician. Similarly, a sealed artifact formed by Beyonder characteristics could also be used to divine the formula for a potion. However, if they were mainly ingredients, then through the production processes and dangerous experiments done by an artisan or other Beyonders, turning them into mystical items, then Klein's divination would be useless at his current state. Even with the enhancement effect provided by the mysterious space above the gray fog, it was useless. Not bad. At least I don't have to worry about the biological poison bottle having any other latent risks anymore. Klein glanced at the werewolf Fong and wisely abandoned his curiosity. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall, Audrey continued her study of psychology. By her feet, the huge golden retriever Susie was sitting there, her eyes shining. From time to time she wagged her tail as if enjoying the scene. Psychiatrist Escalante finished the introduction material and deliberately made a casual remark. Actually, there is such a theory. It's believed that humans would inherit a certain amount of their ancestors' consciousness over the generations, thus forming the underlying logic of one's behavior patterns. For example, although many people have never seen a poisonous snake, they would instinctively feel afraid and wish to avoid it once they encounter one. Why is that? This is theorized to be an instinct that we inherited from our ancestors, something that is hidden in the deepest recesses of our consciousness. In ancient times, people constantly fought with poisonous snakes and all kinds of ferocious animals, and they gradually carved this memory into their consciousness and passed it down. How does it get passed down? Audrey asked with interest. Escalante, with her long hair which reached her waist, laughed. That's a very good question. Some people provide explanations that involve a theory that everyone's consciousness is actually connected at the lowest level. It is one entity, and the traces and characteristics left behind on this entity will affect the consciousness that belongs solely to them. For example, the lowest level of consciousness is like an endless ocean. Our unique consciousness would be the islands situated in the ocean and can be split into two parts. One is hidden under the water, which is the subconscious, which is higher in both quantity and size. The other is exposed on the surface of the ocean, the superficial consciousness that can usually be detected. This is the axiom of this school of thought in psychology. Audrey glanced at Susie, stroked the golden fur on its neck and said, "So, we can use this connected ocean to influence the consciousness of others and achieve the goal of curing certain mental illnesses? This is the mysticism foundation and beyonder powers of a psychiatrist? But it doesn't seem enough and is lacking something. For example, the sky above one's head, the sky which shrouds everything?" Audrey curiously thought as she wore a look of confused enlightenment. "You're really talented in this area." Escalante praised in delight. "However, we can only affect a portion of the surrounding ocean, and through it we can affect those who are close to us. If we venture deeper into the ocean, it will be easy for us to lose ourselves." She looked up at the ornate and complicated clock on the wall, smiled and said, "Time's up. This is the end of today's class. Miss Audrey, if you're interested in this psychological school of thought, then we can continue talking about it next time." "All right." Audrey stood up and bowed. Watching Escalante leave, she nodded in thought. "Ma'am, Escalante doesn't seem like a real psychiatrist. At most she's like me, a telepathist." Was what she just talked about the axioms of the psychology alchemists? They really are patient. Why aren't they trying to recruit me yet? As Audrey was in thought, Susie commented happily from the side, "Audrey, I feel like she's the same type of person as us. No, I mean the same type of dog. No, that's not right. Woof." Susie, who only had a rudimentary grasp of the human language, fell into a state of confusion, unable to find the right words to describe her feelings. South of the bridge, Rose Street, outside the Harvest Church, Klein, in his normal disguise, looked up at the sacred emblem of life on the facade, held his cane, climbed the steps and stepped through the main door. The first thing he had to do was to confirm the situation. Only by doing this could he perform better so as to ingeniously rescue the vampire, Emlyn White, without garnering suspicion. Then, as a detective who had provided clues, he could receive the gratitude from the White family and gain the applause of an audience. It was bound to be an interesting performance. The Harvest Church wasn't big as it only had a prayer hall. Klein found a spot by the aisle and looked ahead as he took off his hat. Bishop Yutravsky was preaching. His height of more than 2.2 meters and his burly physique, which couldn't be concealed by his loose priest robes, gave off an extreme sense of oppression. However, his expression was one of extreme gentleness, filled with appreciation and gratitude towards life. In front of such a priest, no one dared to cause a ruckus. The few believers quietly listened, occasionally making prayer gestures unique to the Church of Mother Earth. Klein watched carefully, waiting patiently, neither conceited nor rash. As the sermon ended, he gripped his cane and prepared to get up to proceed with his subsequent plans. At this moment, a man wearing the priest robes of the Church of Mother Earth entered from the door that led to the room at the back of the cathedral. He looked 28 or 29 years old, had black hair and red eyes, possessing a high nose and thin lips. He was handsome but didn't give off masculine vibes. He was none other than Emlyn White. Klein's mouth gaped a little and nearly failed to close it. Isn't this guy supposed to be locked up in the basement? Wasn't he shouting about how determined he was, that he would absolutely not submit to Bishop Yutravsky's will? Emlyn White distributed the communion to one believer after another, and he finally stopped in front of Klein. Klein's mind whirred and he immediately in a low voice, "Are you Emlyn White? Your parents entrusted my friend to look for you. Why are you here? Did you encounter something? Are you in need of assistance?" Emlyn White didn't seem to have his unique pride and said with a smile that only looked slightly better than crying, "There's no need, I will be returning home soon." He pursed his lips, shook his head and forced a smile saying, "I am already a believer of Mother Earth, no, a priest." This answer was completely out of Klein's expectations. For a moment he didn't know how to respond and he could only shout repeatedly in his mind, "Hey, you were very adamant about your worship of the moon the last time we interacted at the Harvest Church. You said that you would absolutely not convert to believing in Mother Earth. How long has it been and you have already given in? Isn't that way too fast? What about your persistence? Where's your moral integrity? My carefully prepared performance has been forced to end before it has even begun. This is just taking me by surprise." Klein opened his mouth and suddenly realized something amiss. Why is Emlyn White informing me of his conversion? I'm just a detective who accidentally chanced upon him while passing by. Does he wish for me to pass this message to his parents? Is there another meaning behind this? While Klein was guessing, Emlyn White put away his worried and smiled smugly. "You don't have to act, Mr. Detective. Or should I call you the new owner of the master key? Hee to a noble sanguine, everyone has a different smell and has different blood characteristics. Even when I was locked up in the basement I could smell it. I remember your smell. I've been recognized." Klein instantly fell into shock as he nearly entered combat mode. Even if he didn't use his spirit vision, he could tell from Emlyn White's tone and words that he wasn't lying. He was very confident and certain. Just as the tense feelings rose in him, Klein suddenly thought of something. Why should I worry about that? Then he answered his own question in his mind, so what if I was recognized? The current situation is different from what it was 2 months ago. I was left flustered by the incident with Ambassador Bakerland in front of the official Beyonders. I was rushing around trying to grasp at every possible straw. In the process I ended up making contact with Beyonder circles, and even the possibility of me becoming a Beyonder was quite plausible. Therefore, even if my identity as a Beyonder was exposed, they wouldn't think too deeply about it and dig up my past. And it's very likely that Detective Isengard Stanton is a Beyonder, and he maintains good relations with the police and the official Beyonder organizations. He had speculated that I was the same as him and tried to gently rope me in. In this regard, I can barely be counted as a borderline member of the official Beyonders, and if anything were to happen, I wouldn't necessarily be imprisoned. More importantly, I have already made my current image so deeply ingrained that I don't have to worry about any wanted posters. If anything goes wrong, then I can just abandon 15 Minsk Street and my identity as Sherlock Moriarty. So what's there to worry about? Yes, before I came here I had also performed a divination, and the revelation was that there was almost no danger. As these thoughts flashed across his mind, Klein's contracted pupils, slightly appalled expression, and his fight or flight state eased, as if he was discussing the day's weather with Emlyn White. Seeing his calm expression, Emlyn White raised his eyebrows, took a few steps to the side, and squeezed past him before slowly sitting to his side. The vampire looked at Bishop Yutravsky, who was leading the believers in the rite of Holy Communion, and he said with a sneer, "Mr. Detective, aren't you afraid that I'll go to the police station and shout out loud that you're a Beyonder?" Similarly, Klein looked forward and said without turning his head, "I'll go with you and shout out loud that there's a vampire. Come on, let's have an internecine outcome. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Emlyn White's expression stiffened. He raised his right index finger and said, "Sanguine, a noble sanguine. Got it. Before Klein could speak, seeing that Bishop Yutravsky was preoccupied with the rites of Holy Communion, Emlyn White chuckled and said, "Regardless, I'm finally going to be free." I pretended to submit and told the old man that I was willing to convert to believing in Mother Earth and was deeply penitent for what I had done. Although I have no idea what was necessary to show repentance, it's not a problem to put on an act. That old man actually believed me like this, and he was very happy as well. He let me out on the spot and he let me become a priest here. He told me that as long as I memorized the Holy Bible of the Church of Mother Earth, he would allow me to return home. Haha, that old fogey who's all brawn and has become silly from his faith, sure is easy to fool. Easy to fool? Klein turned his head to look at the vampire. Looking smug, he looked forward and said, "Father Yutravsky used to be a pirate. He probably killed far more people than the number of people your father has ever saved. Furthermore, most pirates don't trust their fellow crew members. Betrayal and trickery are common among them. To be a relatively successful pirate able to live to the end, Father Yutravsky wouldn't be a person who's easily fooled, even if he's not a bright person." Emlyn White wore a look of disbelief as he wished to retort. Klein rubbed the top of his cane and leisurely added, "Father has a powerful sealed artifact in his possession. It is known as the Mental Terror Candle. It can allow the wielder to enter the deepest recesses of the target's soul. There no one can lie. Moreover, this is only one of its uses. I don't know if it has any other abilities." Emlyn gradually froze, his eyes losing focus. After a dozen seconds, he whispered with a pale expression, "When I said I was willing to change my faith, that old man came in with a lantern. There was a candle in the lantern and I didn't get a good look at it." Klein tilted his head and gave Emlyn White a sympathetic glance. "Perhaps Father Yutravsky used it to plant a seed in you, one that gradually and thoroughly makes you wholeheartedly believe in Mother Earth." The corner of Emlyn's mouth twitched, revealing a smile comparable to a zombie's. "I don't feel anything at all. It shouldn't be anything like you said. Besides, aren't my parents coming? They can blame the priest through ordinary people, saying that he forcefully detained me, forcing him to make a choice between sullying the Church of Mother Earth's reputation and letting me go. Isn't that a great idea?" Klein maintained his look of pity, clasped his hands and raised them to his nose, acting truly penitent. "If I were Father Yutravsky, I would choose to call the police and have them determine the truth. Tell me, who do you think will suffer in the end, the bishop who has the right to preach or a vampire?" Sanguine. Emlyn White's facial muscles seemed to twitch. He clenched his fist and punched the back of the pew in front of him. "I can wait. Once I memorize the Holy Bible, I will ask the old man to let me return. He is a truly devout person and will not break his promise." Klein didn't turn his head and said with a smile, "I've been to 48 River Bay Avenue. Your parents have already moved away." "Naturally. Not only will they move away, they will also move to somewhere I'm not aware of," Emlyn White responded without hesitation. Klein added with a relatively relaxed tone, "They moved in a hurry. They left a lot of things behind, such as the things in your room." Emlyn White's expression suddenly became extremely wonderful. He gaped his mouth, abruptly stood up, squeezed past Klein, and rushed towards Bishop Yutravsky, who stood in front of the sacred emblem of life. "Father, Bishop, I want to return home, I want to return home, I want to return home," Emlyn shouted. Seeing that there were still believers who hadn't finished their Holy Communion yet, Father Yutravsky didn't respond. He merely gave the pitiful vampire a calm look. Emlyn quickly shut his mouth and became quiet. He paced back and forth, looking extremely anxious. Smiling, Klein stood up, took his cane and hat, and strolled down the aisle to the front pew of the cathedral's hall. When Holy Communion was over, he walked up to Father Yutravsky and said with a serious expression, "Bishop, I don't know why you're retaining Emlyn here, nor do I want to know. I only know one thing. His parents have entrusted me to take him back. If this giant-like priest agrees to my request so easily, I can only light a vigil candle for this vampire, Emlyn. No, I'm sure he will hate candles from this day forth. It's best to mourn for him," Klein secretly thought. Father Yutravsky looked down at them and replied gently, "Emlyn can return home at any time." Klein gave Emlyn White a glance, raised his right hand and tapped his chest. He wanted to gesture the sign of the crimson moon by tapping in a clockwise fashion, but in the end he forced himself to draw the triangular sacred emblem. Emlyn became rather anxious from the look Klein gave him. Without a word, he rushed to the door of the cathedral and left without a hitch. Klein followed him at a moderate pace without any signs of anxiety. After proceeding forward in what appeared like a jog, Emlyn suddenly slowed down and said in a daze, "I feel like I'm starting to miss the Harvest Church, the feeling of memorizing the Holy Bible and the sacred emblem of life. I wish to return to clean and tidy the place. It'll only take an hour. This planted seed is even more vicious than I had imagined. No matter where this vampire goes, he will return to the Harvest Church every day and work for an hour? That's actually quite all right. At the very least, the seed which was planted didn't change Emlyn's faith. In a way, he's showing him some respect, but why did I use the word respect? That candle is called Mental Terror Candle and it's said to be from a dragon. The spectator pathway is rather scary." Klein tapped his cane and said, "Do you need me to remind you of anything?" "There's no need." Emlyn's expression distorted as he angrily said, "I will fight this feeling. I'm going to move to Midseashire or Fasak. I don't believe that I'd still wish to return when I've left Backlund." He gritted his teeth and suddenly exhaled. "Let's take the carriage back to Riverbay Avenue." "All right," Klein responded nonchalantly. After a few steps, Emlyn stopped a rental carriage. Just as he was about to board the carriage, his back stiffened for 2 seconds. Then he said so quietly that Klein could barely hear him, "I don't have any money on me." "I do." Klein smiled. Emlyn stopped talking and got onto the carriage. Klein sat across him, and as the carriage began to move off, he asked as if in thought, "Your father is a doctor? One that possesses outstanding skills in drugs and medicine?" Although he was listless, Emlyn raised his chin out of habit. "This is the gift that we sanguine enjoy. The most outstanding potion masters are all from the sanguine." "Is that so?" Klein whispered to himself, his thoughts a mystery. Emlyn said after a moment of silence, "Write to your friend and tell him that I have returned to Riverbay Avenue. My parents will come looking for me." "All right," Klein answered simply. After nearly 20 minutes, the carriage pulled into Riverbay Avenue and stopped in front of Unit 48. After paying the fare, Klein got out of the carriage and saw Emlyn White look towards the bedroom, his expression becoming abnormally excited. Restraining himself, the vampire pressed his hand to his chest and bowed deeply at Klein. "In any case, I must thank you." Klein immediately revealed a smile. "There's no need to thank me. The bounty reward of finding you and the transportation fees will be obtained from your parents. Also, you have to concoct a medicine with beyonder effects to help me treat a patient. This is the reward that your family should pay. Bounty reward, transportation fees, and medicine with beyonder effects." Emlyn White was left momentarily dazed when he first heard that. This was not the answer that he had expected. "What about your gentlemanliness?" The vampire thought in shock. "As a detective, abiding by clear accounting principles is necessary. Besides, you've even delayed my visit to the Quellac Club. I don't know what food they've offered in limited supply for the past 2 days." Klein looked at Emlyn White as he joked and lampooned silently. After a few seconds, Emlyn forced a smile and said, "I have to see the patient before I can concoct the appropriate medicine." "From your tone, you sound really confident." Klein nodded thoughtfully. He then thought of a problem. The White family seems to be a family of outstanding potion scholars. If I were to really be injured and poisoned, then I can come to them for treatment. Wouldn't all of my efforts of going out of my way to get the apothecary formula from Father Utravsky be for naught? I no longer need to nurture another aid that's good at healing. Reality sure does change faster than a plan. However, it's not really a waste either. I've already made back my investment from Miss Magician. For things like formulas, as long as it exists, it will always be valuable. Besides, the White family will definitely stay away from Riverbay Avenue and live their lives with new secret identities. I might not be able to find them, so it's not that convenient. No, before the mental terror candles inducing thoughts are resolved, all I need to do is wait for Emlyn White at the Harvest Church. With this in mind, Klein took off his hat, bowed and said, "No problem, I will take you there when the time comes. I shall not waste your time any further. Cheerio." Emlyn White's expression changed as he hesitantly said, "If you can remove the effect of the mental terror candle, then you will receive a greater bounty, and," he paused and raised his chin, "and the friendship of the sanguine. I'm a magician and I possess the sun brooch and biological poison bottle. I'm only limited to mediumship when it comes to the aspect of one's psyche, so what can I do? Amongst the people I know, only Miss Justice is a close match, but she's only a sequence 8 telepathist. Unless you change your faith to the fool that doesn't belong to this era, then we will be able to find out how to use the knowledge recorded in the Book of Secrets to help you solve this problem through a corresponding ritual. Speaking of which, vampires seem to be worshippers of the primitive moon, very similar to the Shaman King and the like. Could the ancient god recorded in the City of Silver, the vampire ancestor Lilith, be the primitive moon? Klein said with a smile as his thoughts wandered. I'll keep a lookout for ways to help you. Emlyn White nodded and didn't say anything else. He impatiently turned around and rushed to the door. If it wasn't for the fact that the carriage driver was still nearby, he would have spread his black bat wings and soared directly to the second floor. Klein laughed and shook his head emotively. He rode back in the same rental carriage and arrived at the steam metro not far away. He then made a transfer and returned to Sherwood Borough's 15 Minsk Street. Before entering the room, Klein, who had become accustomed to opening the letterbox, checked for letters. To his surprise, there really was a letter. There was no stamp on the letter. It was addressed to Detective Sherlock Moriarty and was signed off with Jurgen Cooper. Lawyer Jurgen? Puzzled, Klein picked up the envelope and tore it open. Under the light of the street lamp, he saw a piece of paper and 2 bills. The denominations of these 2 notes were 1 soldi and 5 soldi. Total of 6 soldi. I fed the cat 3 times during the period. The agreement was 2 soldi per instance. Realizing the reason, Klein opened the door and lit the gas lamp. As he unfolded the letter, he discovered that it didn't contain much, and the words that Jurgen had handwritten were as precise and serious as he was. Dear Detective Moriarty, thank you for taking care of Brody over the past few days. This is the reward you deserve. I rang the doorbell twice and found that you weren't at home, so I could only put the payment in an envelope and put it in your letterbox. As I might not be able to come back until tomorrow evening, I might miss the verbal agreement which my grandmother promised tonight. As a lawyer, I value the validity of verbal agreements and hope that they will be carried out strictly. Finally, thank you once again. Jurgen Cooper. Mr. Lawyer, your gratitude is so dry and boring that it's even inferior to Brody's, but the explanation for your behavior is very detailed. It really fits the Jurgen style. Also, why place it in my mailbox? If this were Earth, in the time before I transmigrated, I might not even look at the mailbox downstairs for months. Klein smiled as he folded the bills and placed them in his pocket. Then he took out a sheet of paper and wrote to Detective Stewart. After writing the beginning pleasantries, he wrote after some deliberation. I found Emlyn White at the Harvest Church near Tativa Street. It's a very small cathedral belonging to the Church of Mother Earth. It isn't very common in Lone. Emlyn White claimed that it was because of certain matters that he chose to run away from home. Afterwards, he was taken in by the bishop of the Harvest Church and stayed there, becoming a. Klein thought for a moment before writing down the word volunteer. Then he added simply, thanks to my persuasion, he has returned to 48 River Bay Avenue. However, he might visit the Harvest Church often for volunteer work. When he was done, Klein read through it, then he put down the pen and neatly folded the letter. He rummaged around for an envelope, but he didn't affix the corresponding stamp. He planned to hire someone to deliver it directly to Stewart's house the next day. If he were to go through the kingdom's postal system, even if he were to put the letter in the mailbox now, he wouldn't be able to get it taken away by the postman until tomorrow, and then there would be the process of sorting and delivering it. So, although he was also in the royal capital of Backland, Stewart would have to wait at least until the day after next before seeing the letter. Only then would the Whites be notified. And during this period of time, Emlyn White was a penniless guy with only his figurines. This is also for the sake of receiving payment early. Klein chuckled, tidied up the coffee table and returned to the second floor to brush his teeth and take a bath. On Wednesday morning, after spending 2 soldi and entrusting a rental carriage driver to deliver the letter, Klein bought some of the main ingredients for Desi seafood rice, intending to cook fried rice today. He couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva when he thought of the pearly white rice. After spending some time, he finally cooked a pot of fragrant fried rice with bacon and black tea after going through all sorts of hassles in the kitchen. It was so delicious that tears almost filled his eyes. This is truly a moving and nostalgic taste. After eating 2 large plates of fried rice, Klein sat down on the chair and rubbed his belly. As Emlyn White's situation had too many twists and turns, his performance had already ended before it had even really begun, and he couldn't achieve the desired goal. Thus, he could only look for another opportunity to take the initiative for a performance. However, Klein still benefited from this. Failure was also an experience, and it made him understand at least one thing. Unlike ordinary magicians, my performance not only has aides, but it also has enemies and participants. Their reactions and choices can similarly affect its development. I have to consider all of these elements ahead of time. This is also a lesson. It's better to be taught a lesson over such a trivial matter than to be schooled when facing important matters. Klein looked at the empty plate in front of him and contemplated about what other performances he could initiate. After a moment of serious consideration, he realized that there weren't any. Of course, it wasn't absolute. They were just unsuitable for him to do them now. For example, Klein had always wanted to take care of that evil spirit in the fourth epoch ruins of the Tudor dynasty. But even if it was Sharon who had the scarlet lunar corona and Merrick who had obtained the Rampager Beyonder characteristic of a wraith, Klein didn't think that they were able to fight against the high-sequence monster. It was even possible to end up dead before even knowing why. Taking the initiative to perform isn't equivalent to courting death. It's not about using one's life to perform. Klein warned himself. There was something else he wanted to do, but he didn't think there was much of a chance. It was to find the strange child, Willow Septon, who had brought bad luck to the surgeon Aaron. Klein had always been interested in the tarot card which the child possessed, and he wanted to confirm if it was a mystical item. Unfortunately, this case had already been taken over by the Nighthawks, and Klein didn't want to get involved with his former colleagues. I'll wait for Dr. Aaron's break time before heading to the Quelag Club and asking about the progress, and then I'll decide what to do. Klein's thoughts quickly took shape. According to what he knew, Dr. Aaron was usually free on Friday afternoons and Sundays, in which he would play tennis at the Quelag Club. Klein had also confirmed one thing through today's Backland Morning Post. There would be a Beyonder gathering tomorrow night organized by Eye of Wisdom. I can't sell the werewolf Beyonder characteristic or the biological poison bottle for the time being. I can't even find someone to turn the former into a mystical item. The high-sequence Beyonders of the Rose School of Thought are definitely still active nearby, filled with rage. I bet they can't wait to find Sharon, Merrick, and their helper before tearing them apart. He had to keep a low profile in this area for the time being. Klein picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth, and began to clear the table. He had wanted to rest for the day and go to the Quelag Club for a leisurely day without taking the initiative to perform, but then he recalled the Amon avatar which attempted to penetrate the gray fog, and he recalled the role that the Book of Secrets had played in that harrowing moment. So Klein lit the fireplace in the living room and brought the Book of Secrets back to the real world. He then concentrated on reading, studying, and taking notes. Of course, he would later burn the corresponding notes above the gray fog. It was already noon before he realized it when he suddenly heard the doorbell ring. After hiding the Book of Secrets, Klein entered the living room and went straight to the door. The visitor was the thin, bearded Detective Stewart. He looked at Klein with great reverence and excitement, and he couldn't wait to praise him. You really are a great detective with abundant resources and channels. You were actually able to solve this kind of case without any clues. Why do I feel a slight change in my spirituality? It seems like the potion has been digested a little more. In other words, my performance still enjoyed some limited success. However, there's only one person in the audience, and only he was fooled into seeing the wonderful outcome. An audience's applause really is effective. Klein was startled before he revealed a warm smile.